Hey family, welcome back to my video. Today we will see, what if Harry Potter was Majestic Dragonlord and Slayer? Part 5. Before we start, I would like to extend my sincere thanks to the original author of this story for granting us permission to use it in our YouTube video. Your generosity is greatly appreciated. The author's creation and the original story's link in the descriptions. Please do check that first. Now enjoy the video. A Song for Lions.
I'm impressed.
Harry said, looking appreciatively at his younger sisters, whose eyes lit up at the praise. He reached out with his hands and patted them on their heads. His sisters were geniuses when it came to runes. He was almost sure that his sisters must have inherited some long-asleep talent in their blood for them to easily grasp the runic language's core concepts at such young age and apply it to create a runestone all on their own. That said, he was not at all happy that they violated his warning not to attempt to carve a runestone all on their own. Still, his sisters managed to create a functional runestone all on their own. So, can we get a ring like yours then? Sansa asked excitedly. Harry looked at her sharply, making Sansa's shoulders drop. When you turn 11, I'll give you the power rings, said Harry. He watched amusedly as his sisters glared at him and stomped the floor indignantly. Letting out a huff, they ran away, most likely to complain about him to their mother. Harry chuckled at their antics before eyeing the innocent little runestone in his hand. Pressing his power ring against the power rune, he let a sliver of magical energy seep into the runestone. The runes on the runestone glowed eerily a bright yellow as it became enriched with his magical energy. When he pulled his ring back, the runes dimmed down. Why were Sansa and Arya running away from your room with looks that could melt the snow in the north? John asked amusedly from the doorway. They are just annoyed I didn't give them a power ring, said Harry. But their work is exemplary. He pressed on the side of the activation rune, and the rune stone lit up with moderate white light. It was a simple runestone that worked on the principle of the Lumos spell. He had to give it to Sansa for thinking up the idea to use a rune base's light source to replace the candles and oil lamps of Winterfell. I see. So, it's a rune lamp, said John, fascinated by the white light from the runestone.
Runelamp?
That's a nice name. Think of what it means if we can make more of these runestones. We can have better light in Winterfell during the dark hours? John hesitantly answered, looking between the light-giving stone and Harry. We can also reduce the expenses of buying oil and candles. Not to mention, we get smokeless lamps in the castle invulnerable to wind and rain, said Harry. You are right. John agreed after looking thoughtful for a moment. I hadn't thought of that. Speaking of which, when are you going to start training with the power ring? Harry asked, steepling his fingers and looking at John seriously. The rings you made for me didn't work as well as they do for you. I think swordplay suits me better than sorcery. That's because I didn't consider certain factors when I made those rings for you. I think I now know what was lacking, Harry smirked, taking out a small wooden box from his drawer. Placing the wooden box on the table across from John, he opened it. Inside the box were several rings made of Valyrian steel, sitting comfortably on a piece of red silk. But unlike all the rings he created, he had learned to imbue his will powered by his soul into the rings, giving them unique properties. He knew that neat trick from assimilating what he learned from the imprisoned warlocks and some snippets of knowledge he gleaned from Ignotus Peverell. What the? John's mouth dropped open in surprise as the rings turned into small metallic dragons and flew out of the box. The air sang as the dragons flapped their steel wings and settled before John in a straight row with varying colors of stones for eyes. The emerald gemstones signified the connection to nature, Harry said, making John look up at his brother and then at the small dragon with green stones for his eyes. The red ruby gemstones show affinity to fire. The pearl stones signify affinity to water. The white stones signify the affinity to air. John looked at all the dragons as Harry continued to explain the rings to him. John blinked and took notice as one lone dragon stepped forward with eyes of red and pale blue gemstones for eyes. But for you, John Stark, gemstones of ice and fire shall serve you well, said Harry. Harry reached out and took John's hand, bringing it closer to the assembled dragons. The dragon of ice and fire jumped and flapped its wings to settle on John's left hand before coiling around a finger. The dragon shifted around, wrapping its tail and wings around John's finger as it became a ring. The dragon head proudly poked out of the ring with a red and pale blue eye on each side. Harry, I. John was suddenly choked up by emotions as he looked at his brother, who gave him so much. And John, your mother loved you more than you can ever imagine. She gave her life to safely bring you into this world, and it was her last wish for Lord Stark to protect you. This is why our father has never spoken a word about her to anyone, including you. If our enemies know her identity, war will come to the shores of the north. John looked at him with a mix of horror and curiosity. My mother. You know who my mother is? John asked anxiously, his gray eyes wide, pleading for any information. Yes. And when you master the art of magic and warging, I shall share her identity with you. All I ask is that you wait for 4 years. Train hard in sword, warfare, and magic. When you turn 15, I shall make you a competent sorcerer capable of defending yourself from your enemies. Harry, you. But why? Why can't I know now? John asked pleadingly. Because she died to save you. You owe it to her to live your life to the fullest. When you have the power to defend yourself against your enemies, our father or I shall disclose her name. For now, honor her sacrifice and Lord Stark's vow to your mother. You'll know her in time, and all your questions shall be answered. But, all right. John took a deep breath and let it go. I'll do as you ask, brother. Good. In time, you'll understand why this is necessary. Harry trailed off as he felt the gold dragon coin in his pocket start vibrating and slowly heating up, warning him of a message from one of his students in Avalon. What is it? John asked in concern as he saw Harry's eyes gain a sharpness while looking at a gold dragon coin. The Ironborn has attacked Sea Dragon Point. Tell Maester Luwin to call on the lords to assemble at court. It seems the Ironborn have yet to learn their lesson. The court of Winterfell was assembled in a speedy manner because of the seriousness of the matter. It was quite fortunate that most principal houses of the north were represented in Winterfell's court thanks to the feast. I apologize for hastily calling you all here on such short notice, my lords, but I've received word from Avalon that Ironborn ships have been sighted. I do not know whether this is an isolated event, but I'd like to work under the assumption that it's not the case. As of now, the western shores of the north are under threat of Ironborn raids. I welcome your opinions in the court if there are any, Harry said, leaning back against the weirwood throne of the Kings of Winter after he said his piece. My brother begged Lord Stark to leave the matter of the south to the south. We Northfolk want to be left alone from their petty squabbles, and now those pirate scum are back for revenge, Robert Glover claimed, taking to his feet and banging his fist on the table. Leobald Tallheart, the Castellan of Torrance Square, stood up to support Robert Glover. The North has bled enough for the South. When have they ever fought for the North when we faced hordes of wildlings from beyond the wall or Ironborn raids on our shores? The pirates of the Three Sisters are also taking advantage of us, and the Vale refuses to reel them in. Lord Wyman Manderley added. Harry was a little surprised as many more grievances, both genuine and blown out of proportion, were aired in the hall. Silence, Harry snapped, finally having enough of these constant complaints. We are not here to belittle the Southerners. We are here to discuss the Ironborn sighting at Sea Dragon Point and what it means for the western shores of our home. If you can't contribute constructively, you may take your leave from this court. There was a brief silence in Winterfell's court broken by the loud and dangerous growling from Fenris, who sauntered into the hall from the shadows and settled by Harry's side at the foot of the weirwood throne. House Glover apologizes to the Stark of Winterfell. Robert Glover dipped his head. Apologies, my lord. Lord Manderley also followed the example of the Castellan of Deepwood Motte and meekly sat back in his seat. Perhaps the Lord of White Harbor remembered not to annoy him right after House Manderley was given leave to negotiate with the shipbuilders of Bravos representing House Stark of Avalon. Enough. Let's get back to the matter at hand. As Stark of Winterfell, I have a limited scope of authority to gather the forces of the North. That's the only reason why I've yet to order the North to mobilize a second army to end the Ironborn menace, said Harry, cutting across the inertia that gathered in the court. The North is at war, my lord. As Stark of Winterfell, you've all the authority to command us. Leobald Tallheart said hesitantly. Harry was a little embarrassed as he hadn't thought of that little detail. When he was named the Stark of Winterfell by his father, he was explicitly told of all the duties that it entail. His father was also clear that he was not supposed to order the northern houses to do his bidding as he saw fit. He was also quite soundly ordered not to interfere in the matters of the northern lords and their lands without their approval or request. His authority was limited to the Stark lands, and should there be any need for extrajudicial action outside the Stark-owned lands, he was to consult with the respective lords of the land. But Maester Luwin had reminded him that he could exercise the authority of Winterfell if war somehow reached their shores. Harry looked at the Maester out of the corner of his eyes. The old Maester might have seen that he was stunned and took up the responsibility to act before it became awkward. Lord Harrion knows, but it'd be discourteous not to discuss with the lords of the north when you all are so close by. Maester Luwin pointed out. Perhaps we should learn whether this is an isolated incident, my lord. I suggest a raven must be sent to Flint's Finger. If the Ironborn had made any unsavory moves in the sea, the Flints of Blazewater Bay could tell us. The Ironborn longships cannot move closer to the shores of the north without the people of Cape Kraken taking notice. Lord Wyman reasoned. Aye. If there are only a few Ironborn ships, this might be some lone pirates scum out to Reeve taking advantage of the war. Leobald Tallheart said. If that is not the case, and we are being attacked by more Ironborn ships, what do the lords of the north intend to do? Harry asked. Then we gather all our levies and kill those pirates once they land on our shores. Robert Glover shouted. Aye. There was a broad agreement from the lords of the north, allowing him to move unimpeded. Good. Maester Luwin, Harry looked at the Maester of Winterfell. Send a raven to Flint's Finger asking for any sightings of Ironborn longships near our shores. Send word to all coastal towns and castles to be on alert. The silence of House Mormont concerns me. Send a raven to Bear Islands as well. As you wish, my lord. Luwin nodded. Lord Glover, you and your men are welcome to my airship as I travel to see Dragon Point. You can reach Deepwood Mott faster this way. Harry offered. Thank you, my lord. I shall ask my men to prepare. Robert Glover happily said, bowing low. Good. We leave Winterfell tomorrow morning. XXXXX. Lord Stark. Word from Oxcross. Jory Castle said, holding out a small piece of parchment. Eddard accepted the parchment with a nod and read the message from Lord Serwyn. Oxcross has fallen to Lord Megger. The town's garrison was routed, with all surrendering Lannister men under chains, and those who opposed put to the sword. Eddard declared to the lords gathered around the table, with a map of the Westerlands sprawled over it. There was a cheer of approval from the gathered lords. He also reports a host of Lannister men are being gathered at Sarsfield under the command of Ser Stafford Lannister after interrogating the prisoners. How many? Brynden asked. It doesn't say. We must assume it is a sizable host. They were most likely sent by Lord Lannister to reinforce Golden Tooth. He must not have known Lord Leo stayed true to his vows to King Robert, said Eddard. Oxcross must be strengthened. It'd be folly for Lord Serwyn to hold that position by himself. Roose Bolton suggested. I agree. Lord Karstark and Lord Ryswell shall hold Oxcross and scout the enemy numbers. We must know more about our enemy before we make a move. Eddard suggested, earning nods of agreement from the gathered lords. While Oxcross is held as our forward position, Ser Brynden shall take command of another host, move west of Oxcross, and camp here. Eddard marked the spot on the map of a small region between Tarbeck Hall and Oxcross. Why there, my lord? Lord Bracken asked curiously. If I were Lord Tywin, I'd gather a host in secret near Tarbeck Hall and use Oxcross as bait. I want to ensure Oxcross is facing the enemy we know, namely Ser Stafford Lannister. Eddard explained. It's a good strategy. If Ser Stafford attacks Oxcross, we can take them from behind. Lord Blackwood said, nodding in approval of the plan. It also gives us good cover to send scouts to keep watch on the river road for enemy movements. Ser Brynden also approved the dispersion of troops. Lords Bolton, Umber, Glover shall accompany me as we sweep the coasts of Westerlands from Banefort to Feastfires. Hopefully, they'll surrender rather than fight, said Eddard, pointing at the two coastal castles on either side of the map along the length of the coast of the Westerlands. He looked at his fellow lords and saw they were broadly in agreement with the plan so far. The rest of our forces shall stay at Golden Tooth, reinforcing the supply lines to Oxcross. If Ser Stafford's host is defeated, Sarsfield is our next target, where we shall muster our full host. By then, the coast shall fly the Baratheon banners. Eddard concluded his plan. I shall lend you some of my best knights and scouts to make sure you have a speedy campaign, Lord Stark. Leo Lefford offered. That'll be most appreciated, Lord Lefford. Eddard nodded at the Lord of Golden Tooth. Lord Stark, if you don't mind. I'd like to join your campaign on the coasts with my men. Lord Jonos Bracken requested. Eddard looked into the brown eyes of the Lord of Stonehenge. He briefly thought of the Blackwood-Bracken enmity and thought having the two lords in separate campaigns would only work to the advantage of their army. All right, Lord Jonos. Having the Bracken cavalry by our side will undoubtedly be a boon in the campaign. Eddard nodded at the brown-haired man. Eddard allowed the lords to take their leave from the meeting, leaving him and Ser Brynden in the room. Are you hoping to entice Ser Stafford Lannister to chase after you? Ser Brynden asked. One can only hope they'd commit such folly. If they chase after us to the coasts, it will open up the river road for our forces. Eddard muttered. Most likely, Ser Stafford would bunker down at Sarsfield once he learns the Leffords turned their cloaks. We'll most likely be looking at a grueling siege that'd last months. Eddard frowned as he looked at Ser Brynden curiously. You are skirting around the matter you want to say, Ser Brynden. I'd hear what's on your mind, Ser, said Eddard. Loot the castles, villages, and towns. Strip them bare of anything valuable: food, cattle, gold, silver, steel, bronze, even clay pots if you must. The Westermen are few, and they don't have the most fertile lands in the Seven Kingdoms. But what they have is their mines, and from the mines comes all their wealth. Take their mines and wealth away from them, and you'll win the Westerlands from the chokehold of Tywin Lannister. You want our armies to steal from the small folk and lords alike? Eddard asked incredulously. I can understand foraging food for the army, but stealing away their wealth? Your first target is Ashenmark, is it not? It's the seat of House Marbrand, one of the most loyal supporters of House Lannister. Strip the castle bare of its wealth and take control of its mines. When the lords of the Westerlands hear of what happened to House Marbrand, I assure you the castles of Nuns Deep, Crag, Banefort, and others will surrender rather than put up a fight. There'll be less bloodshed this way, said Ser Brynden. And what shall be done with the loot taken? Eddard asked skeptically. Do with it as you wish. Ser Brynden shrugged. Take it with you to the north. Send it to King's Landing as a gift to the crown. Or just return the loot to the rightful owners after the war. Eddard became thoughtful at the advice provided by the uncle of his lady wife. There was strategic value in what Ser Brynden was suggesting, and yet he found it distasteful to behave like the Ironborn. He was aware that men often did partake in thievery and all sorts of unscrupulous behavior in war. But it sat ill with him to command his army to forcibly take someone else's rightful property to win the war. Then again, he could rest easy if there was less bloodshed on both sides. Honor is so hard to find in war. Eddard thought morosely. Dorna Swyfd lived in fear of what lay in wait for her family in the near future. Her husband, Kevin Lannister, was now a prisoner of Robert Baratheon. She worried for her husband as she knew her husband was now considered a rebel by the Iron Throne. Not a day goes by where she doesn't pray for his safety. 7 times, she would pray to each of the 7 for the safe return of her husband. She cared not for the pride of House Lannister or Lord Tywin's children. But first, the war had to end for even a chance of seeing her husband again. By the looks of it, the war would not end so easily. Dorna looked to the west, where a bright yellow glow illuminated the night sky of Lannisport. Screams could be heard in the city as the harbor burned with yellow flames. She felt her sons Willem and Martin flinch as the city walls endured the bombardment from the siege engines. The walls will protect us, won't they, Mother? Martin asked, his eyes wide with fright. Of course, the walls will protect us, my sweet. The Dornishmen shall leave soon. Dorna kissed her son's golden brow lovingly. When will father come? Willem asked, his pale green eyes looking pleadingly at her. Dorna barely held back her tears as she looked at her twin sons. Gathering them in a tight hug, She pressed kisses to their brows as ships of the Dornish fleet sent out streaks of fiery stones into the city. The night sky was filled with trails of fire and smoke, making her confidence wane. Still, she had to appear strong for her children. Your father serves Lord Tywin, as is his duty. When his duty is completed, he'll return. Dorna assured them. She felt her twins flinch again as they heard more assault on the city from the siege engines. So, she sang a song for her little lions. There lived a lion whose name's spoken only in fear, with claws as sharp as steel. When he roars, the jungle is shaken to its core, for it's a warning to those of lesser grit. So, they ran, as fast as they could, to hide from a lion of the west. Green are his eyes, and gold is his mane. Only courage could be seen in his eyes if you dare. And 4 artworks related to the story. Discord, https://discord. GG/NW2JH25FJF. The Demon Wolf P1. Victarion Greyjoy patiently waited on the bow of his ship as messengers from the scout ship he sent ahead returned with word of the raids. He considered this latest misadventure ordered by his brother a folly. He had said so to his brother's face, but not because he thought the North was any different from the weak Greenlanders, but because the Ironborn had yet to recover from the losses of their failed rebellion. They had fewer ships and fewer trained men to raid and fight the Greenlanders. It was an unfortunate truth, but the truth nonetheless. There was also the threat of the Redwyne fleet and the Royal Fleet to consider, but the Lord Reaper of Pike refused to heed not one whit of his concerns. To make matters worse, Aaron and his drowned man have predicted a great victory in the seas. In the end, Victarion had to obey Balon's commands, as he was the Lord Captain of the Iron Fleet. The lords of the Iron Islands all agreed there was a serious risk of incurring the wrath of the Iron Throne, but his brother was adamant about punishing the North. According to his brother, the Baratheons and Lannisters would fight to the bitter end, which was the chance to exact revenge against the North. While Victarion tactically agreed that the war between House Baratheon and Lannister was an excellent opportunity, the Iron Fleet desperately lacked ships. Without the proper number of ships, they could not effectively raid the vast coasts of the North. Therefore, Victarion devised a plan to use the 30 ships under his command effectively. He sent 10 longships under the command of Ralph Kinning to attack Deepwood Motte and the Bear Islands. The Mormonts and Glovers had few ships between them, but together they could be a threat to the Iron Fleet. Therefore, he wanted them dealt with, and should Ralph be lucky, the man could end up stealing the ships from Glovers and Mormonts. Lord Captain, meet name be Ulf. I see. What does Enric Drum say? Victarion asked, staring at the sailor with his cold black eyes. My lord says he be attacking the shores as you ordered, Lord Captain. Met with some Greenlanders on horses while taking the timber in the raid, Ulf said, grinning a little with a few of his teeth missing. What banners did he see? Victarion asked. Banners of a black wolf, my lord. Ulf said. I see. Give the man some ale for his troubles. Victarion ordered his men on the ship. Thank you, my lord. Ulf dipped his head before the men escorted him away. Victarion let out the breath he was holding as he was overcome with relief. The first part of his plan had succeeded in drawing out Avalon's garrison to ride out of the safety of the castle. Now, it was his turn to act, and he didn't wait a moment to give orders to his steersman, Rumolf Stormdrunk. Lay aloft and loose t'gallants. Clear away the jib. We sail straight ahead for Avalon. Victarion ordered. All right, you maggots. All hands on the ropes and the oars. Rumolf shouted, the Ironborn on the ship rushing to obey the orders. Victarion moved to the starboard side and kept an eye on the other 14 ships under his command. His men began signaling for the other ships to follow their course. He could only hope that his gamble would work. 15 ships were not a sufficient naval force to take on a castle's defenses, but he hoped Avalon was not as highly defended as it was a newly built castle. With the garrison's attention elsewhere on the shores of Sea Dragon Point, he hoped the surprise attack would yield him the castle. If the Stark boy was in Avalon, then all the better. He could take the boy hostage and force Eddard Stark to return his nephew. Then there were also the great riches of Avalon to consider. He could even force the wolf pup to make him a Valyrian steel axe once the boy was under his custody. Why stop at one weapon? I could force the boy to make many. Victarion mused, grinning at the prospect of owning a bunch of Valyrian steel weapons. It took them 3 days to reach the shores of Avalon. By the time they saw the massive towers and walls of the castle, they were nearly running out of supplies. So, the giant towers and walls of the castle gave a bad omen to Victarion. The seeds of doubt began to take root in his mind as he realized the castle was not some half-finished structure made of wood and stone, but a massive fort capable of holding out against a long siege. All hands to the oars. "Row, you lazy bastards! Row!" Victarion shouted, realizing the element of surprise was now a major factor if he was to secure victory. He had the thralls handling oars whipped to increase their rowing speed. Victarion kept his eye on the shores with his far eyes, but he could see no hasty movements. There was some movement where a budding shipyard was coming up, but the Greenlanders were running away at the sight of Kraken banners. The anticipation kept building up in him as his ships neared the shores of Avalon. He could see several guards lining up on the crenellated walls of the castle with their bows, but he paid them no mind. Instead, his attention was on the gigantic weirwood tree that grew out of the castle walls. "Arm the siege engines. Aim at that tree. We'll burn the Greenlanders out of their precious castle by burning their false gods," Victarion ordered. His orders were passed to all the other longships following him. The siege engines were quickly armed with stones dipped in whale oil. "Make sure not to aim the weapon at the shipyard. We'll put those ships to good use," he ordered. When Victarion thought they were inside the proper range, he ordered the men to light the stones on fire, and the siege engines spat out globes of fiery stones towards the castle. The burning rocks left trails of fire and smoke as they streaked across the air against the castle. The Ironborn and his ships were ready to celebrate when all of a sudden, a dome of bluish color appeared around the castle, which protected the castle from their attack. The burning stones smashed into this strange dome and promptly scattered into dust. Victarion stared at the strange sight with his mouth wide open in surprise. He thought he was dreaming for a moment, but when he looked at his men, they were all in a similar state of shock. "What kind of sorcery is this?" Victarion muttered to himself. Shaking himself out of the stupor, he immediately ordered his men to unleash another salvo at the castle. "Arm it quickly, you lazy maggots. I'll throw you overboard to the watery halls of the drowned god if you lazy idiots annoy me again." Victarion snarled as he watched his men bumble with arming the siege engines. Cajoled by the urgency in his voice and the threat of getting thrown overboard the ship, the men under his command speedily armed the siege engine and let the flaming stone loose on the castle. Other longships followed closely in using their siege engines. But once again, Victarion could only watch with fear as a pale blue dome of some kind stopped the flaming stones. The stones just smashed against this strange sorcery and vanished. He could see the fear on the men's faces as they realized this campaign was not going to be as easy as they imagined. Before he could take command of the situation, Victarion was forced to turn his attention to a longship sailing near his ship. The sound of something piercing through wood attracted his attention, and he found it was a scorpion bolt piercing into the bow of the longship. Thankfully, the bolt didn't punch through the ship, but to his surprise, it was glowing with an eerie white light. The next moment, Victarion was blown off his feet as the longship exploded with a bang. Victarion groaned as his back hit the wooden floor of his longship. His ears were ringing from the sound, which left him disoriented. It took him a moment to regain his bearings, and when he managed to climb to his feet, he saw the full scale of destruction wrought on one of his ships. The ship's bow had disintegrated entirely, with only a few splintered floorboards and half-torn beams hanging loosely. The ship was sinking as seawater rushed into the bowels of the longship, dragging it down to the bottom of the sea. But that was not all. He looked on in horror as some of the men on his ship were bleeding or outright dead, with splintered wood punching into their eyes and necks. He felt something wet on his face, and when he placed his hand against his forehead, it became drenched in blood. "What the?" Victarion muttered, but he didn't get to search for any injuries as he heard another booming sound. Victarion looked around and found another one of his ships was now breaking in two from the middle. The screams of ironborn sailors drowned out the waves and the wind, and Victarion could do nothing but helplessly watch the carnage unfold before his eyes. His ears picked up a whistling sound as more and more scorpion bolts began raining down on his ships. Victarion couldn't help but flinch as another one of his ships was consumed by a raging fire, followed by the ship getting hit by a scorpion bolt. He could not help but look at the castle with dawning horror in his eyes. The heretic Stark boy was far more dangerous than he had ever imagined. That thing must be a demon sent forth by the vile storm god to fight the drowned god. Victarion thought with fear. His ship suddenly lurched sharply to the port side as the waters below exploded outwards. Victarion realized the scorpion bolts were drenched in some foul sorcery that even made the seawater of the drowned god explode. Turn the ships around. Hard a starboard. Hard over. Now. Victarion barked out orders, immediately deciding to turn away from the fight. But Lord Captain, we have survivors in the sea. Rumolf protested. They'll be taken care of by the drowned god. Obey my command, or we'll lose the whole fleet. Victarion bellowed. More and more scorpion bolts came their way from the castle. Victarion could only watch helplessly as more than half of his ships were torn asunder by the accursed sorcery of the demon wolf of the north. Somehow, he managed to escape the claws of death with 6 ships. He was forced to abandon all the survivors for the sake of preserving the few intact ships. Those ships that violated his command were torn asunder by sorcery, leaving many thralls and ironborn alike to the mercy of the sea. They could do nothing for the ironborn sailors in the ocean. Looking at the flailing sailors and thralls, he noticed that the sea was now painted red. He didn't know whether the setting sun was the cause or the blood of his men. Either way, he wasn't waiting to find out lest his ship join the others at the bottom of the sea. Maybe we could send rafts, Lord Captain. Rumolf suggested tentatively. No, their fates are now in the hands of the drowned god or the demon wolf. If they are true ironborn, they'll choose the halls of the drowned god rather than the demon wolf's mercy. Victarion muttered. Where to, Captain? Rumolf asked after a long interval of silence. We'll regroup with Anric and Ralph. After that, I'll make a decision. For now, sail west to the far-off shores of Sea Dragon Point. Victarion ordered. Aye, Lord Captain, Rumolf said dejectedly. Victarion's shoulders dropped in shame as he knew he was running away from the battle. But there was no other choice before him if he was to preserve the fleet. If he lost the meager fleet the Iron Islands had managed to put together, their islands would be left undefended. It was either preserving the fleet or his honor, and Victarion would gladly sacrifice his honor again to save the Iron Fleet. He just hoped his brother would understand his decision. Harry watched the action happen from the safety of Avalon's walls. The garrison had performed their duties without fail. The moment they spotted the Ironborn ships, they blew the special horns he had built into the watchtowers on the 2 layers of walls protecting Avalon. The horns were intertwined with the runestone, which activated the first line of defense of the castle. At first, Harry had only thought to activate the energy dome under his sole discretion. But then he thought better of it and tied the wards to a number of horns and had the horns installed in the watchtowers. This way, the castle's defenses could be activated even if he was away from the castle by the guards on the towers if they encountered a threat. Your training worked. The aim of our tower guards has significantly improved. Harry complimented the Castellan of Avalon, who was also his archery trainer. The men have been practicing rigorously as you ordered, said Silos Poole. Good. You've trained them well, Silos. The cousin of Vayan Poole puffed up in pride as the man took great pride in his archery skills. We've also managed to make some significant additions to the original designs of the artillery. As per your suggestion, we've added a scope to guide the men better to train in on the target. Maester Marwyn said, obviously eager to make sure his contributions were not left forgotten. Impressive. Please remind me to take a look at the scopes that you added, Marwyn. Maybe I could add some spells to increase accuracy and perhaps even facilitate better guidance, said Harry, looking at the Maester before turning his attention to Silos Poole. Now, tell me about the status of our shores. The scouts I sent have found 2 areas west of Avalon where the Ironborn have struck. I have sent some men to deal with one of the shores, which has a fishing village. The other one is far away and mostly deserted, but I believe the Ironborn are taking timber from this site. Silos reported. I see. Are these 2 places the sole areas that the Ironborn attacked? Harry asked. We can't be sure, my lord. The scouts only found 2 areas. Silos reported. I've already sent a contingent of men with horses and a week's provisions to deal with one area. So, it's possible the Ironborn might have struck other places along the coasts of Sea Dragon Point? I'm afraid so, my lord. Silos nodded. Harry looked thoughtful for a moment before coming to a decision. Maester Marwyn, I'll need you to inform me the moment a raven arrives from Deepwood Motte. We'll make plans to have the Ironborn purged from our shores once word arrives from House Glover. You suspect we are not the only ones being attacked by the Ironborn? Maester Marwyn asked curiously. It's a reasonable assumption to make. Silos Poole commented. Is it, though? Lord Stannis smashed the Iron Fleet at Fair all the last time they rebelled. I doubt the Ironborn have many ships to raid the entire coasts of the north after their failed rebellion. Maester Marwyn expressed his doubts. In either case, we'll only move once we get clarity on the foe we face. I need to know whether this is a random raid or an attack on the north as a whole. If it is the latter, what would be your response, my lord?
Selospoole inquiret cautiously.
I've already spoken with the lords at Winterfell. It'll be war, Harry said coldly, looking into the sea where he could see the Ironborn longships burning while his ships were sailing into the sea to take the survivors as prisoners. I suppose we might get a better understanding upon questioning the prisoners. Harry's intuition about the prisoners didn't pan out so well, and he now understood why Maester Marwyn expressed his doubts about getting any valuable information from the survivors. It turns out that all the Ironborn sailors had chosen to drown instead of being taken as prisoners. Chosen might be a strong word, as the Ironborn sailors most likely didn't get the chance to save themselves, as their plate armor most likely dragged them down to the bottom of the sea. Not even one Ironborn sailor survived the wreckage. Still, couldn't they have saved themselves by holding on to a wooden plank or something? Harry wondered aloud, letting out a frustrated groan. I told you, my lord. The Ironborn are reckless and fanatic in their faith in their god. It's a dangerous combination. Maester Marwyn commented, seated in the Lord's Chamber of Avalon, while Harry walked back and forth in irritation at the loss of valuable intelligence. Stupid little buggers, Harry growled. And the survivors we rescued from the wreckage. They have nothing worthwhile to say? I'm afraid they were just thralls made to handle the oars inside the hull of the ships. They have no knowledge of the plans of the Ironborn, but from them, we know the Iron Fleet sailed from Pike with 30 ships under Victarion Greyjoy, said Maester Marwyn. We saw 15 ships on our shores. So that means we have 15 unaccounted ships sailing who knows where. We have 2 confirmed sightings of Ironborn ships on Sea Dragon Point, but our scouts never saw more than 2 or 3 ships in either of those locations. They're most likely raiding another location, my lord. Besides, if Victarion Greyjoy leads this raid, I'm afraid Castellan Silos was right to assume the Ironborn declared war on the north.
Maester Marwyn sighed grimly.
Harry came to a stop at the window overlooking the pool where the sculpture of a black wolf was providing warm water for the inhabitants of the castle. He could see many children running around the pool playing games. They remained ignorant of what was happening outside the walls of the castle. But not all places in the north could claim their children were far away from the depravities of war. Most places in the north or Westeros would see children live in crushing poverty. Most children would be lucky to get full bellies a day in Westeros. While he couldn't change the entire continent, Harry was adamant that he could create a far better north with his knowledge. And in time, his disciples would spread the knowledge of magic, sustaining the growth of the north long after he was out of the picture. Perhaps magic would even spread to the rest of the 7 kingdoms in time. But for all that to happen, the north and his work could not be threatened again by war. If all his work could be undone because some lazy pirate scum decided to reave the shores of the north, then Harry would have to make an example out of such idiots to serve as a reminder to all his enemies out there. Harry closed his eyes, and he came to a decision. Send ravens to all the castles of the north. Tell them the Stark of Winterfell asks them to raise another host and command them to march to Avalon. Tell them the north is at war with the Ironborn. Harry ordered. As you wish, my lord. Marwyn bowed before turning to leave the chamber. Oh, and one more thing, Maester Marwyn. My lord. Marwyn paused, looking at Harry curiously. Send one raven to Pike. Tell the Lord Reaper of Pike that winter is coming for House Greyjoy. Harry said coldly. Stannis stared at the barren wasteland that sprawled out before him. He could see nothing but ashes and half-burnt villages and fields for miles. And to think these fields were producing grain enough to feed half of the Stormlands for a decade or two. Stannis thought the Reach was truly blessed to have such fields with high yields. Such fields had undoubtedly made the Reachmen richer, but also made them weak. In Stannis' eyes, the Reachmen, except for the Marcher Lords, had become complacent and too enamored with their feasts and wine. The wealth they accumulated over decades of peace in their lands had sapped their martial powers, if there were any. That was why the Lannisters had such an easy time destroying everywhere they marched in the Reach. "This is where we depart, brother." Robert's booming voice reached his ears, making Stannis frown. Even now, Robert is so eager to send me away. Stannis thought, I was the fool for thinking Robert would change. Perhaps, if Robert had said one nice thing to him in the camp, he'd have dissuaded his brother from going further. He'd have told him about the dreams and the whispers of the old gods. But even now, Robert was adamant in keeping him at a distance. Instead, Robert preferred the company of these weak, useless reachlings that preyed on the idiocies and vices of his older brother. Even now, reduced as they were in wealth by Lord Tywin's army, the Reachmen pampered his brother with the finest wines, food, and whores. Some had even started sending their daughters into his brother's bed in hopes of making them the new queen. "Don't you have anything to say, Stannis? After all, I'm giving you a great responsibility," said Robert. Stannis reined in the urge to scoff openly at his older brother. Whatever else his brother might be, Robert was his king. He'd not show open defiance or insult to his king before the assembled royal army. "I'm honored to lead the troops in your name against Cornfield and Silverhill, your grace. I'll have your banners fly on the seats of House Swift and House Serret." Stannis managed to say that with a straight face. In truth, he was being sent away to attack two unimportant seats in the Westerlands, while his older brother would lead the invasion into proper Westerlands by attacking Crakehall. From Crakehall, Lannisport was only a few leagues away. Stannis realized he was being deliberately kept from fighting some of the most critical battles. The hilly terrain that lay waiting for him would ensure he'd be left fighting a long, drawn-out campaign in the hilly borders of the Westerlands and the Reach. His only chance of quickly concluding the campaign would be if House Swift and House Serret surrendered without long, drawn-out sieges. Undoubtedly, the lack of supplies would also contribute to his woes. The Lannisters had meticulously burned down anything that'd be useful. Therefore, his army would be forced to rely on the provisions they could take and the supplies they'd get from the Reach. Foraging was no longer an option in this war. It was an interesting tactic employed by Lord Tywin. Only time would tell whether the Old Lion's tactics were effective. The Lords of Northmarch would help you take Silverhill. Lord Rowan sent a raven that their troops were gathering at Golden Grove. They've managed to drain the fields and avoid waterlogging in most flood-affected lands. Once you take Cornfield, you are to march to Golden Grove. From there, the entire North March will join you as you march along the banks of the Lesser Mander towards Silverhill. Take the seat of House Serret, and from there, I hope you find a way to take Deep Din from the west. The Knights of the Vale should be placing Deep Din under siege from the east. I shall make sure Lord Lewis Liddon pay the price of rebelling against the Iron Throne," Stannis said, nodding at his brother. "Good. I'm handing you an important task of taking Deep Din and allowing the Vale army to cross into the Westerlands. Do not duck this up like Dragonstone." Robert growled towards the end, his blue eyes darkening at the mere thought of the escaped Targaryens. Stannis could only grit his teeth at the insult, but he held his tongue and merely nodded as was his duty. "Good. Now go, brother. I have my own battles to fight," said Robert before riding away. Stannis watched his brother ride off on his black horse. He shook his head and turned his horse around to face the host of Crownlands and Stormlands troops under his command. "The scouts have returned, my lord. There is a small village to the northeast a few leagues away. It's burnt down, but we can set our camp there and send more scouts looking for enemy troops," said Lord Gullion Swan. "Then, let's not dally any longer," said Stannis, leading a column of Baratheon soldiers with some of the knights from his wife's family with him. Despite his current situation, he was most eager to crush the lions of the West. On that sentiment, he was fully supportive of his brother. The time had come for the Westerlands to learn what real war looks like. Stannis was all too happy to show the Westermen waging war with the sturdy men of the Stormlands was a bit different than waging war against defenseless women and babes. And 4 artworks related to the story. Discord, https://discord. GG/NW2JH25FJF. The Demon Wolf P2. Anric Drum stared coldly at the men felling the trees and taking the lumber into his flagship. It was truly a shame that he was not allowed more longships under his command. If more ships were under his command, he could have secured more lumber to be transported to the Iron Islands. Wood was the most expensive commodity in the Iron Islands, which made the great houses of the Isles fiercely protective of their forest lands. The unintended consequence being it became so much more expensive to build the Iron Fleet. So, Anric was forced to secure lumber while the Iron Fleet was reaving across the western shores of the north. However, Anric was aware it was practically impossible to transport the required lumber for rebuilding the Iron Fleet with their current meager number of ships. Therefore, he had asked the men to safely store some of the lumber in a hidden spot along the shoreline. In time, he hoped to sail into Sea Dragon Point and have the rest of the wood transported to the Iron Islands. If the drowned god blessed them with good fortune, the North would fall under Ironborn control. It'd take months for the Northern Lords to find this site. By then, he could transport enough lumber for a few ships back home. Move faster, you lazy fools. The Northerners will march their entire army to torch our ships much faster than you lazy bums move my timber. Anric shouted at the men. Move faster, you lazy whores. Move. Anric could only shake his head as the men rushed to move the lumber faster. It's a good thing the North has a vast shoreline. It'll take time for those tree huggers to find us, said Torwald. Anric grunted, eyeing the brown-haired man out of the corner of his eyes. He didn't remind the man of the last time they met the Northerners in battle near a fishing village. It was by luck that they managed to escape with their ships intact. He also distinctly remembered Torwald Browntooth running away from the fight rather than fighting the Northerners. Coward, Anric thought, turning away from the spineless Ironborn. While Torwald was a shoddy fighter, he had to admit that the man was a good sailor. After all, Torwald was the one who found this spot, and Anric saw the opportunity to take a good chunk of the wood from the forest. It's a shame, however. If we had more ships, we could transport more wood for the new Iron Fleet, said Torwald. Have you secured the timber inside the ships? Anric asked. Yes. We've taken abroad as much as we can. Are they bound safely with ropes? I don't want the logs to come undone and crush the men while we're sailing home. Anric asked. I made sure the logs are bound properly. There's nothing to worry about. Torwald promised. Captain, a sudden shout from one of his ships made Anric Drum switch his attention from overseeing the transportation of lumber to the crow's nest on the main mast of his ship. Why's the lookout pointing northeast? There's nothing but trees and hills in that direction. Torwald commented. Anric was also similarly confused. Maybe the lookout noticed smoke from a nearby camp. Anric thought. Demon, storm god, ship, flying. The lookout cried from the crow's nest. Anric stared at the man sitting atop the main mast making wild gestures and shouting inaudible nonsense as the winds howled in his ears. Suddenly a huge shadow fell on top of him, covering a large area. Look up, the lookout screamed, pointing wildly at the sky. Anric noticed a beast floating high in the sky, blocking the sun. He could not help but stare at the huge demonic beast in the sky. Anric just froze and couldn't move for a moment, just like everyone else. Then he heard someone scream, bringing him back out of the stupor. Archers, arm yourselves. Anric cried, keeping his eyes on the giant demonic being in the sky. Could it be the Stark boys' flying ship? Torwald asked fearfully. Those are just rumors of drunkards and womenfolk, Anric said dismissively. Are you ducking blind? Torwald asked incredulously. Anric wanted to punch the man, but his attention was captivated by the fact that an opening had formed over the side of the floating object, a door. So, it's a ship of some sort and not a dragon or a flying demon in the service of the storm god. Anric thought. Anric squinted his eyes as he saw what he assumed was a woman brandishing a bow from the flying ship. He watched as an arrow released by the woman pierced through the air. He lost sight of the arrow for a moment, and was forced to look around him to see whether any of his men were hit. No one was hit, and he found a lone arrow with red tail feathers sticking out on the sand near some of his men. He blinked, and in the next moment, flames were everywhere. Bright yellow and red flames consumed his men whole, as if a storm of fire materialized right in the middle of the shore. The heat of the flames was such that Anric ran back a few paces just to be safe. Screams of his men assaulted his ear, and the smell of burnt flesh took over his nose. He could only watch in horror as the Ironborn, consumed by fire, ran for the sea to put out the fire, eating away their flesh. Some managed to jump into the sea's embrace, but most fell to the ground as the hellish flames claimed their lives. Those that managed to throw themselves at the mercy of the sea continued to scream their hearts out as salt water burned their wounds. "The ships! Take the ships into the sea!" Anric screamed, pushing his men to have the ships set sail. Arrows continued to rain down from the sky, claiming more and more lives of his men. In his rush to climb aboard his ship, Anric fell flat on his face on the floorboard. At that moment, he saw an arrow with white feathers sticking out of the main mast of his ship. Anric climbed to his feet, preparing to run away, but the arrow he saw exploded with a bang the next moment. His ears rang as splintered wood shot out everywhere. The main mast of his ship groaned as it could no longer stand upright. His eyes widened as the enormous wooden mast slowly tilted towards his direction. Anric didn't wait around to find out what would happen. He ran straight for the railings and jumped over the starboard side. He fell straight into the sea, but he managed to escape death by a hair's breadth. The main mast was now broken, and managed to crush a few of his men to death. He could only watch helplessly as the rest of his ships were blown to pieces or consumed by unnatural flames. With no hopes left, Anric swam to the shores, and that was when an arrow fell before him. He just stood there and didn't move as he felt helplessness enter his mind. The arrow exploded, and he was consumed by darkness. When he regained his bearings, Anric found he could barely move his limbs. His ears picked up the clinking of chains whenever he tried to move his arms and legs. His vision remained blurry for a moment before he regained a semblance of clarity. The first thing he saw was the wooden floor on which he was sitting and the chains that bound his limbs. Anric shook his head to get a semblance of normalcy to his senses. "Oh, you are awake, pirate," Anric heard someone say as he felt a kick on his legs. He could practically feel the sneer in the voice. "Adela, play nice. We don't want our guests to feel unwelcome on our ship." Anric looked towards the direction from which the sound came. He saw a young boy with black hair staring down at him. "I'm Harry Stark. What's your name?" Anric remained silent and merely stared back at the Stark boy impassively while his heart was beating faster. He could not see any overt signs of sorcery on the boy, but he was on guard. "I saw the sigil of a white bone hand on your cloak and armor. You are a drum, aren't you?" Harry Stark asked, looking into Anric's eyes. Still, Anric chose to remain silent. A fist smashed into his right cheek with force when the silence stretched on. "Speak when my lord asks you a question, pirate." Anric heard someone snarl. "Calm down, Selos. It's only natural for the pirate to lack any decorum. But I'm sure the pirate can learn some manners. Isn't that right, pirate?" the Stark boy asked with a mocking tone. "We're no pirates, boy. We're Ironborn." Anric heard someone snarl back. His eyes immediately found a fellow Ironborn bound in chains 5 feet to his right side. "I see. This one talked out of turn, which is so rude. Throw him away." Harry Stark casually ordered. Anric gasped in fear as a section of wooden floorboards folded away, revealing the trees and hills underneath at a great distance away. Anric watched on with apprehension as one of his men was forced up to his feet and thrown down through the open hatch. The Ironborn screamed as he fell to his death. The sound continued to haunt him, but with each passing moment, the scream became distant until only the howling winds remained in his ears. "So, are you ready to talk, pirate? Tell me your name. What is the plan of attack Victorian Greyjoy concocted? How many ships are there in your Iron Fleet? Where are the rest of the ships?" Harry Stark asked, gray eyes glowing eerily. But Anric maintained his silence, refusing to budge. He stared straight into the gray eyes of the Stark boy fearlessly. "I see. Your name is Anric Drum. Ralph Kinning has 10 longships under his command with orders to capture or burn the ships of Houses Glover and Mormont. 15 ships are under Victarion Greyjoy's command. 5 ships were given to Anric here, making the total strength of the Iron Fleet 30 longships. Anric did a double take and stared in horror at the Stark boy. How? Anric asked hoarsely. How did I know about your little plans? That's quite simple. The answers were in your mind, and I simply sought them out. Haryon Stark said with a wide smile. Anric could only feel revulsion and anger as the Stark boy openly practiced sorcery on him. He tried to attack the Stark boy, but he was held back by the chains, defiant even when facing an enemy with overwhelming power. How brave of you, Haryon said, standing up from the chair and coming in level with Anric's eyes. I lack enough competent sailors. Should you pledge your undying loyalty to me, I shall offer you a path that leads to a better life than the one that stares at you right now. Anric couldn't help but scoff at the idiotic boy. We are Ironborn. We'll not follow a measly mutt like you, boy. Anric snarled. I see. At first, I thought it'd be a good idea to wipe you miserable Ironborn from your equally miserable islands. But then, a thought came to my mind, said Haryon, snapping his fingers while looking at Anric and the rest of the Ironborn prisoners. Why waste years training a bunch of sailors when I could just take you all under my command? You are delusional, boy. No self-respecting Ironborn would submit to a sorcerer like you. Anric claimed with confidence. Pride, like all emotions, revolve around the individual identity someone takes on. In your case, you and your people pride yourselves in your identity as one of the Ironborn, born and raised in the Iron Isles. You take pride in reaving the world. But identities can be destroyed. The key is to destroy the memories that enshrine the identity. Anric found himself looking at the pointy end of a strange stick. Fortunately, there is a spell to make that possible. Anric flinched as he saw a green glow on the tip of the stick. You are a demon spawn. The drowned god will have your soul. Anric shouted, straining against the chains. Don't worry. I'll make sure your drowned god understands the folly of standing against a demon wolf. Harry said sardonically before using the memory charm. Obliviate. Good work, Anya, said Harry, looking at the fine work of his first student from the airship. Thank you, my lord. Anya bowed, her long black hair now wrapped in a bun behind her head. The Ironborn longships continued to burn while the sea worked tediously to drown the broken parts of the ships. The survivors were now bereft of their memories, as he had taken his time to wipe out their identity sans their memories with regards to sailing. For the time, he had essentially molded them into a bunch of mindless sailors, but he was confident they'd slowly build a new life in Avalon. He'd be giving them the vaunted second chance Dumbledore used to harp on about. It was only that Harry enforced this second chance in his design with no room for conscious choice. Also, he did it out of self-interest rather than a genuine desire to reform some good-for-nothing pirates. He'd have killed them all, but he desperately needed a skilled workforce to build ships and sail them. It was quite fortunate that the Ironborn fell into his grasp like this. It was only when he calmed down enough to think it through that he realized Balon Greyjoy had actually given him a precious resource by invading the north. Not only did the Lord of Pike enforce the belief in the Northern Lords for the need of a fleet, but he also gave Harry the opportunity to poach the skilled sailors from the Iron Islands. If he was lucky enough, he could perhaps buy out the Iron Islands from King Robert. Maybe he could even manipulate King Robert and claim paramountcy over the Iron Islands. But before such plans could be set in motion, House Greyjoy needed to be culled, and therein lay a huge problem in the form of Theon Greyjoy. Even if Harry were to kill all Greyjoys in the Iron Islands, Theon would inherit Pike. Unfortunately, he didn't have the heart to kill Theon over the ownership of the Iron Islands. Therefore, he was going for the next best thing. Harry was going to steal all the best sailors and warriors of the Iron Islands under the guise of war. Was this really necessary, my lord? Anya asked, looking uncomfortably at the unconscious Ironborn inside the airship. Desperate times require desperate measures. While we may face such mundane enemies, Harry nodded in the direction of the Ironborn. We must never forget our greatest enemy lies beyond the wall. Morality won't deliver you victory when death is your enemy, my lord. Anya bowed her head, properly chastised. What shall we do next, my lord? Shall we wait for Victarion Greyjoy's ships? No doubt, He'll come looking for Drum and his men. Silos Pool asked. Harry looked south, where the sky and the sea became one. He could stay and wait for Victarion Greyjoy to show up. It'd be easy to have the Iron Fleet destroyed on this shore. But he was not in a hurry to have the Iron Fleet destroyed when he was after the human resource of the Iron Islands. Most of all, the Ironborn need to be made an example of what happens to his enemies. That should send a proper message to the Associ and his enemies in the south.
No.
Let Victarion Greyjoy run to his islands with his tail between his legs. We'll focus on destroying the 10 ships attacking Deepwood Motte and the Bear Islands, said Harry, taking a look at the map of the north and placing a small wolf figure on the Bear Islands. After that, we'll pay a visit to Pike. Stannis was feeling a swell of disappointment as he stared at the open gates of Cornfield. He should have felt a sense of accomplishment for the surrender of House Swift, but he felt no thrill in this victory. It's my fault. I expected Ser Harry Swift would hold out and remain defiant to the end, Stannis thought, letting out a sigh of disappointment. Instead, the Knight of Cornfield raised the white flag on his castle after 2 salvos of boulders were thrown at the walls of Cornfield from his siege engines. It was quite a disappointing sight to witness, and a waste of time and resources as well. If House Swift had surrendered after seeing the army camped outside his walls, all the days spent building siege engines and sending scouts around the castle to look for its weakness could have been avoided. At the precipice of victory at Cornfield, Stannis only felt like he had wasted 3 weeks. My prince, look. We have riders inbound. Ser Axel Florence said. Stannis grunted. Lord Swan, Ser Axel. Accompany me. Stannis found 2 men riding their horses towards him bearing the white standard. He urged his horse forward into a trot, but otherwise didn't move farther away from the range of his archers. He knew enough to mistrust the Westermen to try some underhanded tricks on the field, even if it was under the white flag. As far as he was concerned, the Westermen were no better than the Dornishmen. My lords.
Imse ai Swift.
This is my son and heir, Ser Stefan. Ser Harry Swift introduced. Stannis remained silent and merely observed the Knight of Cornfield and his heir. Ser Harry's was an older man with a small white beard and a bald head. His eyebrows were hardly visible, and the man had pale blue eyes. The knight wore a green doublet with a blue rooster stitched into a small patch of yellow near his chest. Ser Stefan, on the other hand, was young with black hair and brown eyes. My lords, House Swift is sworn to serve House Lannister, and my daughter and grandchildren remain in Lannisport. You must understand why I had to stand with Lord Tywin despite knowing the folly of his cause. Ser Harry Swift said with bowed head. We were under the impression it was because of your daughter's marriage to Ser Kevin Lannister, my lord. Nevertheless, I applaud your decision to surrender, but we have terms. Stannis said sternly. I ask for nothing but the safety of my family, including my daughter and her children. Ser Harry Swift said, looking nervously at everyone. You know as well as we do that Prince Stannis cannot speak for the safety of your daughter and her children, Ser. But we can make sure King Robert and his Grace's allies are informed of your surrender, and should we find your daughter and grandchildren, they shall be treated fairly. Lord Gullion Swan promised. That is acceptable, my lord. Ser Harry's bowed his head, showing off his bald head. We'll have 2 hostages from you, Ser Swift. Your son shall ride with me while your granddaughter shall serve as a lady in waiting for Lady Arwen Oakhart at Old Oak for the duration of the war. You shall raise the Barthian standard in your castle and swear allegiance to King Robert. Your men shall also join us in our campaign. Stannis paused, staring at the 2 men. I consider these terms reasonable. Do you accept them? He watched the father and son exchange a look before agreeing to the terms he offered. Half an hour later, Stannis watched the banner of the crowned stag fluttering over Cornfield. It was just a start, but soon he'd see to it that the Baratheon banners fly over Silverhill and Deep Denver. It was only a matter of time, but he felt like the deciding battle would be the siege of Lannisport. He wondered how that was going for the Lannisters with House Martell and Redwyne placing the city under siege from the sea. The woes of a stag and a viper. Robert was at his wits' end with the march towards Craighall. There was no other way to describe the march along the ocean road other than hell. If there was a hell in Westeros, he had seen it as he marched his army into the Westerlands. Wherever the Lannister army had marched, It burned everything to the ground in the reach. Whole villages were burnt, fields were burnt down, the small folk butchered, and wells were covered in mud and slime, making the water useless. Everything north of Old Oak was burnt to the ground, forcing his army to create a long line of supply lines as foraging was out of option. Robert had thought this would stop once they reached the borders of the Westerlands. Instead, it was the same inside the borders of the Westerlands. Nothing of worth was left standing in the land. It looked as if the Lannister army had looted the vast tracts of lands north of Old Oak. If there was something the Lannister army couldn't take with them, they burned it or destroyed it in some way. Some wells were filled with dead animals and mud, but their scouts had found a few wells with clean water. But it turned out to be a costly mistake to depend on the water from the wells the scouts found. The few men that unfortunately drank the water from the wells shat themselves to death. It took them a while to find out that the water in the wells that they assumed were clean water was instead filled with poison of some sort. Even the maesters in his camp were hard-pressed to find what sort of poison the Lannisters were using. Some of the maesters had suggested the Lannister men had used a combination of poisons, leaving unpredictable symptoms. This had left the maesters facing difficulty in treating the men without proper medicine. Ravens had been sent to the Citadel asking for aid, but he didn't know how that would pan out. Even if the Citadel sent forth some expert maesters, it'd take time for them to travel through the ocean road to reach his camp. He was not keen on waiting around for some old men in gray robes to travel from Old Town to take the fight to the Lannisters. Therefore, he had men dig new wells along their path to Crakehall for clean water, while leaving the poisoned soldiers behind in supply depots his army built along the ocean road. It was a bit tricky to dig up new wells because of the hilly terrain of the Westerlands, but it was better than waiting around forever to have clean water transported from the reach. However, food remained a problem for the army, which had to be transported along the ocean road. Robert looked at the burnt remains of a village with a noticeable frown on his face atop his horse. He felt two of his Kingsguard knights slip into his flanks. Robert eyed Ser Barristan and Ser Aerys Oakheart. "Tell me, Ser Barristan, what do you think happened to the small folk in this village?" Robert asked, looking at the knight touted as the bold by the Seven Kingdoms. "They must have been relocated to Crakehall, your grace," said Ser Barristan. Robert grunted before turning his sights on Ser Aerys Oakheart. "What do you think, your grace?" Ser Aerys blinked, looking taken aback at the question. "What do you think happened to the small folk of the villages we found along the way?" Robert asked. "Lord Tywin would have taken away the small folk from the villages like Ser Barristan said. However, I think the able-bodied small folk might have been forcibly conscripted into the Lannister army, with their family kept as hostages. Perhaps they might be in Lannisport or Crakehall. Or," Ser Aerys trailed off with an uncomfortable look, "or," Robert prodded, "or Lord Tywin must have killed them all. Without too many men, he'll have fewer mouths to feed, allowing Lord Tywin to conserve his resources." Robert grunted, hearing the Kingsguard knights loud and clear. "I agree. I wouldn't put it past those greedy blonde-haired cunts to do something like that. I should have listened to Ned that day after the sack of King's Landing and hauled those Lannisters to the wall or the block." Robert growled, looking north where the rest of the ocean road was now sprawled out between several rocky cliffs and woods on either side. "Your grace, the camp is ready. Perhaps you'd be partial to spending some time under the tent's shade," said Ser Barristan. "Yeah, spending time inside the tent. That's all I've been doing," Robert growled, frowning at the road ahead before retreating into the tent. When night came, Robert remained inside his tent, drunk out of his mind while cracking jokes at the expense of his guests. "So, you're saying you ran out of the Crofter's home after ducking his wife, while you thought it was the man's daughter?" Robert laughed. "Your grace. To this day, Annie hasn't forgiven me and refuses to believe I mistakenly snuck in through the wrong window. Her mother, on the other hand, is always welcoming." Beric Dondarrion smirked as the men laughed and raised cups in his honor. "Tell it true, Dondarrion." "You?" Robert didn't get to finish his question as he heard screams from outside his tent. Rushing outside his tent with an assortment of knights and lords from the Stormlands and the Reach, he was greeted by the sight of a large volley of lit arrows falling down from the night sky. "We're under attack. Take cover," Robert screamed, taking a shield from nearby and holding it over his head. He fell to a knee and angled his body in a position that gave him maximum cover under the shield. He was joined by many like-minded knights, looking to stay put and brave the volley of arrows rather than make a run for it. Your Grace. Sir Ares Oakhart joined him, locking shields with him, giving him more cover. Good man. Robert nodded at the Kingsguard knight. Your Grace here, take this. Sir Ares offered his white helmet. Robert merely shook his head as arrows began to bounce off his shield with distinct thudding sounds when they found their mark. We slowly retreat with each step towards the tent. My hammer and armor are in the tent, said Robert. All right, Your Grace, Sir Ares said. Together they moved slowly under the constant barrage of arrows. Robert could only grit his teeth as more and more arrows rained down on top of them while screams of the men filled the night sky. Robert crawled back into his tent with Sir Ares by his side. He managed to take God's grief into his hand and take on a helmet as well. He had no time or luxury to put on his armor because his tent caught fire. Robert immediately exited the tent with Sir Ares by his side. They found Sir Barristan waiting outside with his shield raised over his head, ready for battle. Your Grace.
Sir Barristan.
Let's go kill some lions, Robert bellowed, running straight in the direction the arrows were coming from before the Kingsguard knights could say anything. Your Grace. Wait. Robert ignored all the calls for caution as he was itching for blood. His antlered helmet and the gleaming warhammer let the men know their king was leading an attack against the enemy. To me, Robert shouted, running towards the edge of the camp, rallying the men towards him for an attack. To the king. Baratheon. Many more shouts joined him, and Robert lived the moment. He could feel his blood dance in joy as the thrill of battle overcame him. This was what he missed, the thrill of staring death in the face in the field. Raising his warhammer high for all to see, Robert led the men towards the enemy, but to his displeasure, he could see the enemy was retreating. He could hear the sound of hooves disappearing into the distance, but he was unwilling to let them escape that easily. He didn't brave volleys of arrows to turn back halfway from a battle. Therefore, he ordered the charge of the cavalry to ride down the attackers hiding in the dark. Sir Barristan quickly arrived at his side with a horse for him. Robert was quick to climb over the horse, but he refused to retreat as Sir Barristan suggested. Your Grace, we are getting spread out and separated from the camp, Sir Barristan warned. We're losing the high ground. Our men will be more vulnerable to enemy archers. Robert just grunted. Forward, he yelled. Howling sounds filled the air all of a sudden as a volley of fire arrows once again filled the night sky. To Robert, it looked like small falling stars as the flamed arrows rained down on his army. He immediately raised his shield, braving the volley of arrows head-on without surrendering his equanimity. Fire arrows were less dangerous when there was nothing around to catch fire. Fire arrows tend to have heavier arrowheads which also blunted the arrow, making it less dangerous than regular arrows. He urged his horse forward, never breaking a stride despite the arrows raining down on him. He could feel he was just climbing a slope with the ground littered with arrows that were aflame. If it weren't for the heat of the battle, he'd have stopped to admire the beautiful sight of little specks of light littered across the ground on a night that had barely any moonlight. However, Robert was forced to pull on the reins of his horse and come to a stop as the enemy launched round objects dipped in oil that immediately caught flame once they rolled over the flame arrows littering the ground. Oh, duck! Robert grunted, struggling to control his horse as the globes of flames rolled down the slope, picking up traction with every passing second. The rolling mass of fire crashed into his men, who were struggling to turn away from the approaching fire. To make matters worse, more arrows rained down on them. Robert grunted when an arrow punched into his thighs. Your Grace, we must retreat. We are in the range of their archers, Sir Barristan said, coming to his side, keeping a shield over Robert as an extra layer of protection.
No.
Robert grunted. We can't see them because of the darkness. We'll lose more men if we press on,
Sir Barristan warned.
Robert could feel the rage build up in him at his inability to crush some skulls. However, he was not blithe about the situation he found himself in. Your Grace, they're throwing tumbleweeds made into a roll, Sir Ares said. Robert dithered for a moment, watching the men around him scream and stampede as they were either lit on fire or they were being peppered with arrows. He cast one look towards the enemy hiding in the shadows, and then at the bloodied men. His mind wavered. "Retreat," Robert ordered, turning his horse around. Riding back to the camp, he was once more overcome with the same emotions he felt when Tarly routed his army at Ashford. The only saving grace was that he lost fewer men here than in the Battle of Ashford. At least, he hoped that was the case. Help. Please no. Help. Harry's eyes twitched in irritation at the constant moaning and crying for help from the half-burnt bodies littered on the shore of the Iron Islands. Sectum Sempra, the dark-cutting curse cleaved through the neck of two ironborn reavers. Their heads hit the floor, their bodies twitching on the sand with blood pooling around them, turning the white sands of the island into dark red. "That's better," Harry muttered, enjoying the peace and quiet that prevailed in the wake of the death of the two pirate scum. He watched the tides continue to crash into the shores, occasionally bringing planks of wood or even just dismembered bodies of his enemies. Such a waste. Harry shook his head at all the death and destruction that was before him. Harry had extended an olive branch out of the goodness of his heart, asking for the surrender of the Ironborn. He had used the sonorous charm to amplify his voice and promised to give them a second chance from his airship. When he gave the offer, the Ironborn responded by launching a scorpion bolt at him, which was very rude. He thought he was teaching the Ironborn idiots a lesson when he had the entire ship consumed in fire, burning the crew alive in their precious ship. Apparently, the Ironborn were thick-headed morons who didn't seem to have inherited survival instincts. The remaining Ironborn ships tried to attack him instead of surrendering, which just pissed him off. That was a terrible move from the remaining Ironborn. He had their ships destroyed in quick order, and the survivors were summarily executed, except for the thralls and a few useful sailors. Harry set his eyes on the flying carpet that was coming towards his position after scouting around the wreckage of the ships. Harry had modified the initial set of enchantments to make the flying carpet into a small scouting vessel for some of his students to use. The problem was that only Anya could use the carpet effectively, since she was the only one with the skill to use a power ring among his students properly. He had a feeling Elzara Snow would also have that skill, but she had yet to properly control her outbursts of magic. She was clairvoyant when it came to magic, but her struggles remained in controlling the enormous magical power she was blessed with. John also had the potential capability to use magic to control the carpet, but Harry had not tested it out yet. After all, he had yet to give any proper training to John other than some reading material that explained some of the basic training exercises John could use. The carpet hovered a few feet away from the sandy beach, allowing Anya and Kyla to walk out of the carpet. "No more survivors?" Harry asked, looking at his two students who had mastered the special bows he had gifted them. "None, my lord," Anya replied, her black hair bellowing behind her back, but that could not hide a few arrows missing in her quiver. Harry didn't comment on that, as he knew Anya despised the Ironborn with a passion. It'd take a genuinely insane person to like the Ironborn in general. The Ironborn were a leech to civilization in the grand scheme of things. Their entire culture was poised to wage war on the basic concepts of a functioning society. From what he had learned, the Ironborn were little better than the Dothraki barbarians of Essos. The world won't miss them if a few more wind up dead. Good. With most ships of the Iron Fleet destroyed, we can focus on the invasion of the Iron Islands. Have the word sent to the lords to assemble their men at Avalon. It's time Pike gets another visit from the men of the north," said Harry. "My lord, look," said Kyla, pointing to the distance where banners could be seen fast approaching them. "It's the Mormonts," said Harry, noticing the bare banners carried along by the group. Suddenly, Harry felt his magical senses feel a strong echo of magical power from the island. He turned his sights westward, where he could feel something calling out to him. As the group approached him, he felt the call of magic from the island become much sharper. The group of Mormont men came to a stop at a respectable distance and dismounted their horses. It was only when the leader of the group removed the helmet that Harry realized not all in the group were men. "Lord Harrion, on behalf of House Mormont, I welcome you to our lands," said Daisy Mormont, bowing at her waist. "Lady Daisy." Harry nodded at the heir of House Mormont, noting that the Daisy was wearing boiled leather armor with a green cloak around her shoulders. "You've relieved us from the raids of the Iron Fleet, Lord Harrion," House Mormont would be honored to host you and your people in our halls. Harry kept only an ear out for what Daisy Mormont was saying, while most of his focus was on the echo of magical energy he was picking up. It was almost like a magical beacon without a map to pinpoint the location. It was frustrating not to know. He turned his focus on Daisy, who was looking expectantly at him. "Yes, I'll be happy to spend time with your family. I'll also be in need of your ravens," said Harry, changing some of his plans on the dime. Harry gathered he could just send ravens to hasten the preparations in Avalon. The Iron Islands were not going anywhere. He could afford to spend a few days in the Bear Islands to check out the magical energy signature he was picking up. The fact that the Mormonts were desperately trying to ingratiate themselves into his good graces should be a boon in tracking down the origin of this magical energy. Strangely, he was finding a similarity between the magic he felt from the Bear Islands and that of Nymeria Sand. It was just a feeling, but often his feelings tended to be true. Thinking about Nymeria brought him thoughts about the war in the Westerlands. I wonder whether Oberyn is close to getting his revenge for Elia Martell, Harry thought. Oberyn Martell took a deep breath. There was a strange silence that hung in the air. The clouds were fast getting filled with dark clouds. He hoped the wind would carry away the rain clouds, as rain would give the defenders of Lannisport an advantage. 12 days had passed since the siege began, and Oberyn had enjoyed every day, unlike some. The Lannisters were kind enough to send out sorties to destroy their siege engines, and he enjoyed cutting them down with great pleasure. While the siege engines of House Redwyne were important, the city would not fall with those tricks. The walls surrounding the city were too well built to fall with siege engines and too high for ladders or siege towers to be effective. The best bet to make the city fall into their hands was deep mining. That was why he had the Dornish army focus on digging a tunnel southwest part of the city. Unfortunately, the rocky terrain surrounding the city was proving to be a hindrance in quickly completing the tunnel before the Lannisters found out. Draining the last drips of Dornish red in his cup, Oberyn walked out of his tent with his spear in hand. "My prince, Lord Franklin." Oberyn nodded at the Lord of Skerich and a capable warrior. Oberyn had given the command of the Dornish army that was fighting together with Paxter Redwyne and Baelor Hightower to Lord Franklin Fowler, while Lord Fowler ensured the Dornish presence in the attempts made by the Reachmen to scale the walls of the city. Oberyn looked after the progress of the deep mining. Did Redwyne stop tire of the siege? "I don't see any significant movement from the Reachmen," Oberyn commented, both of them walking towards the southern corner of their camp. "Lord Redwyne has decided to use siege towers to make an attempt on the city walls. He is waiting to see whether it'll rain today. It'd be a significant advantage for us if that were the case." Lord Franklin pointed out. "Not so much of an advantage. Rainwater will flood our tunnel, hampering our efforts," said Oberyn. "That's unfortunately true. How far along are we with the tunnel, my prince?" Lord Fowler asked. "Not far enough. The ground is hard, filled with large rocks. It'll take us maybe 2 or 3 weeks to finish the tunnel," Oberyn said unhappily. Oberyn felt a cold breeze pass through him, making him look at the sky. A small drop of water fell on his nose, making him frown at the sky. "The gods are cruel," Oberyn thought, looking at the sky with lugubrious eyes. One drop became many in a matter of a few seconds, making Oberyn let out a curse. The war horns from the Reachmen came a few minutes later, signaling the beginning of their attack. "Go, Lord Franklin. Good hunting," said Oberyn. Oberyn didn't waste any moment and ordered the men to set up some supports inside the tunnel. He also ordered the men to retreat outside the tunnel if the rain persisted immediately and the tunnel caved in. To his displeasure, the rain showed no sign of stopping. In fact, it was strengthening, threatening the tunnel they had painstakingly dug over the last 2 weeks. He spent some time overseeing the men safely sent inside to mount support beams along the length of the tunnel. "My prince." Oberyn looked up from the work of his men to see Ser Ryan Illyrian approach him. "Lord Redwyne has started the assault. I want channels cut around our tunnels to lead the rainwater away from our tunnel as much as possible. Do it fast," Oberyn ordered before taking his leave with Ser Ryan by his side. When he found a good vantage point to look at the battle, he found 3 siege towers being moved against the city's walls. The Reachmen are fortunate. The rain will keep the city garrison aiming properly with their siege engines. Their hot oil also won't be as effective either. Sir Ryan said excitedly as the siege towers drew closer towards the city's walls. Do you think they'll manage to breach? Sir Ryan trailed off as horns blared from the other side. Oberyn watched as the city's defenders sent a sortie against the Reachmen. We'll see soon enough, my friend. Soon enough, said Oberyn, once the screams of men filled the air as they began killing each other in earnest. And 4 artworks related to the story. Discord, https://discord. GG/NW2JH25FJF. Godkiller. Harry was quite right to think there was something different about Bear Island. He had known it the moment he set foot on the island. As expected, Mage Mormont had thrown her daughters at him to please him, or even just shamelessly tried to entice him to one of her daughters. That was the natural reaction he expected from all the northern houses. This time, it had the added benefit of gaining him the opportunity to take a closer look at Daisy Mormont. He had known there was something seriously different about Daisy Mormont the first time he met her at Winterfell. It was almost like he was getting an otherworldly presence from the island and Daisy Mormont. That was why, after reaching the castle of Mormonts, he sneaked out of his room in the middle of the night to study Daisy Mormont. To his surprise, he came across Daisy Mormont taking her leave out of the castle. The guards, for some odd reason, were sleeping soundly in their posts. Harry kept a safe distance away from the heir of House Mormont on a flying carpet while Daisy rode off into the woods on a horse she commandeered out of the stables. It was a bit difficult to keep up with the Mormont heir on the carpet, but he could track her rather easily. Daisy Mormont was like a lone bright star in the vastness of space. He could track her without even using a tracking spell, as he could feel her with his magical senses. It was like watching a moving well of chaotic magical power. Even if Harry wanted to ignore it, he couldn't help but notice Daisy Mormont. He was not stupid enough to follow Daisy without any protection. Harry understood there was a chance that she was being used as bait. Therefore, he took certain precautions just in case. He released an additional flying carpet and made it hover high in the night sky. In case of an emergency, the carpet would function as his backup while he followed Daisy into the woods. For nearly an hour, Daisy rode her horse through the woods without a stop until, finally, she came to a stop near a wide pond. Harry willed the carpet to stop and hovered safely, hidden behind a tree branch. It was a little bit dark for him to see everything in detail, but he could make out Daisy Mormont walking around the pond until she stopped before a huge tree. Luckily enough, the clouds shielding the half-moon moved aside, shining some much-needed moonlight around the pond. Under the auspices of the light provided by the celestial body orbiting the planet, Harry saw a heart tree that looked far different from all the other trees he had ever seen. Unlike the usual heart trees he had seen, this one lacked a white bark, and instead, it was completely green. The 5-pointed leaves remained red in color. The face carved on the tree was pale white, with red sap dripping out of its eyes. Harry took out a telescope and zoomed in using the magical lens inside to get a closer look. He saw Daisy Mormont kneeling before the heart tree and whispering something against the carved face. When the Mormont heir stepped back, the eyes of the tree glowed with an ominous red color. The waves of magical that washed over the area was tremendous. Harry's eyes widened at the scale of power that he was witnessing, exuding from the heart tree. It was as if he was in the presence of Dumbledore and Voldemort, or even the ice dragon he met at Skane. Incredible, Harry thought, witnessing the surge of magical power from within the heart tree. The telescope's magic allowed him to witness veins of energy passing inside the trunk of the heart tree. It was unlike the heart trees he had seen in the mainlands of Westeros. It's almost as if, yes, I'm not part of the old gods. A voice suddenly whispered into Harry's ears. Harry was startled to see that he was discovered so easily despite the notice me not charm he had applied on himself and his flying carpet. The green sheen on the heart tree rippled before it folded into one small space. The entire green color separated from the heart tree and became a green-skinned creature with 2 golden antlers growing out of its forehead and bright yellow eyes. The creature had long brown hair with streaks of green in it. It also looked humanoid, with 2 legs and 2 arms, along with a pair of ears. The heart tree is now pale white like the other trees. Harry noted. Come now, Harry and Stark. I mean you no harm. The creature spoke once again, but its brown lips never moved for its sound to reach him, which was fascinating. He was sure the creature was not speaking into his mind. He could clearly hear the words being spoken through his ears. It was some kind of magically amplified speech which was fascinating to witness. With some trepidation in his mind, he urged the carpet to lower to the ground near the pond. The moment his feet touched the ground, Harry expanded his senses, trying to decipher any hidden traps on the ground. But he could find nothing that was threatening or with malicious intent within his immediate vicinity. "Who are you? What are you doing with Lady Dacey?" Harry asked, keeping his hands behind while also summoning the Elder Wand into his hand. Once he noticed a cloud of dense magical energy covering the irises of Dacey Mormont. "My name is YGG. As for Dacey, you need not worry. She is my daughter, and this was the only way for me to ensure you'd come to visit me." Harry openly gaped at the creature for a moment before he forcibly schooled his features to be neutral. He analyzed the creature that claimed its name was YGG and Dacey Mormont, who looked like she was in dream. In all his studies of ancient myths surrounding the North, he had never come across this YGG character. If he were to judge the creature by its appearance, then he'd have assumed it was one of the illustrious green men that were supposedly inhabiting the Isle of Faces. Or if he were to dip into the lores of his home world, then he'd have called it a variant of the Dryad. Harry had met Dryads in his time, and they had more in common with the children of forest than this creature. "Say I believe you. Why are you still holding Dacey under your thrall?" Harry asked, clamping down shields around his mind and preparing himself to use the mind arts against the creature if need be to release Dacey Mormont. "I do not wish for her to know of her ancestry. Not do I wish for her siblings or her mother to know about my existence. The less they know, the better they'll be shielded from the other gods," YGG said. That did not necessarily put Harry to ease. In fact, YGG's response only made him more alarmed. The fact that Mage Mormont did not even know that she had a daughter with a creature like YGG set off alarm bells in Harry's mind. With a start, Harry realized he had never known who was the husband of Mage Mormont. He racked his brain for any shred of details about Mage Mormont's husband, and there was nothing he could recollect. It was as if the husband of Mage Mormont was shielded by. Harry's eyes widened as the realization set in. A personalized form of Fidelius charm that protects the identity of Mage Mormont's husband. Harry theorized it should be an impossible feat for any ordinary creature to pull off. But he supposed YGG was nuanced enough to pull off such a complicated piece of magic. "What do you want with me?" Harry asked finally, realizing that he needed to bid his time to see what was going on between the spirits. "You are at war with the Ironborn, are you not?" YGG asked. "Yes. What concern is the Ironborn to you?" Harry asked back. "Let's just say that I have an interest in those islands. But first, let me give you some valuable information if you seek to destroy them to their roots." Now, Harry was interested a little bit. The Ironborn were somehow connected to YGG, and for some reason, a creature as powerful as YGG was somehow asking him to destroy the Ironborn. The red flags continued to rise in his mind as he thought about his current predicament. If you have this valuable information that could destroy the Ironborn to their roots, why don't you use it and destroy them? Harry asked. "Because I am a god. Unlike you mortals, I'm forbidden from interfering with mortal affairs," said YGG. "Oh, is that so?" Harry coolly said, gripping the Elder Wand tightly in preparation for what was to come next. "Yes. If I act against the Ironborn, I'll trigger retribution from the drowned god against the people of Bear Island. The only way to dismantle the Ironborn is to strike hard and fast against the drowned god himself and kill him. It'll weaken the hold he has on the people of the Iron Islands." Harry paused his plans to attack and possibly kill YGG. "The drowned god? You know where this drowned god is and how to kill it." Harry frowned at the green-skinned creature. "Yes, of course. I shall even aid you in ending the tyranny of the Kraken, young Stark," said YGG. "What if the old gods deem you a threat and come after you?" asked Harry, fishing to see how the creature would respond to the old gods. "I've lived on this island for thousands of years. The old gods have never seen a reason to make any hostile moves against my domain. I don't see how that's going to change suddenly with the threat looming from beyond the wall." Harry remained skeptical of the claims made by YGG, mostly because he had no means to verify them. Ignotus had never mentioned a god that goes by the name of YGG to him, This left Harry in a quandary, as he was left with little to no information. It'd be impetuous of him to act with information solely given by YGG. And that meant only one thing. He had to contact the old gods and get a second opinion. It was likely that YGG was born after the time of Ignotus Peveril's arrival in Westeros. Why do you want the drowned god killed? Harry asked. To know that, you must know the origin of the drowned god and how I came to be on this island. I have enough time for a story, said Harry, transfiguring a pebble into a chair and making himself comfortable. Harry cautiously levitated Daisy Mormont beside him on the flying carpet. The heiress of House Mormont was soundly asleep, ignorant of the happenings in the world outside. There was nothing else to be done for Daisy besides waiting for her to recover from the effects of suspended animation. You'll need this when you face that old kraken, said YGG, placing a golden arrow that was carved out of one of the stray branches of his antlers. I'll keep that in mind, Harry replied, taking the arrow into his hands and storing it away in an expanded pouch secured on his belt. Don't forget to plant those saplings I gave you, said YGG. I won't. So long as you don't forget what's required of you, YGG, said Harry. He pointed his wand at the horse Daisy had liberated from the stables and fired off a spell. Relatio. The harness on the horse was magically removed, and he slapped the horse on its back. The horse rode away into the wild, gaining his freedom. He willed the carpet to rise easily, climbing over the top of the tree line. The spare carpet that was flying high in the sky rushed towards him and settled a few feet near Harry on the carpet. All right then, back to Mormont Keep, Harry muttered, willing the carpet to fly straight for the castle. Once they reached the keep, Harry carefully levitated Daisy Mormont into the bed in her room. The heiress of House Mormont snored the moment her head hit the pillow. Letting out a relieved sigh, Harry carefully extracted himself from the room and slipped into his quarters through the open window. Once he was safely inside his room, he warded the place to the bone before taking out the saplings and golden arrow YGG gifted him. According to YGG, the arrow contained a significant portion of divine energy amassed by YGG over the years. Harry wholeheartedly denied there was anything divine in the energy consecrated inside the arrow. It was old magic, shaped by the intent of a being taken birth in the spirit realm. That was the only speciality the arrow had. In fact, Harry felt confident he could drain the energy inside the arrow and turn that energy into a more powerful tool with his own modifications. He was not going to waste such a powerful source of energy capable of destroying a god go to waste on a measly arrow. Then his attention went to the saplings he received from YGG. Harry felt like this was a more dangerous piece of spirit weapon than anything else. After all, he was intimately familiar with weapons of a similar kind from his interactions with the old gods. He had weaponized the weirwood saplings to increase the reach of the old gods and to unleash the restraints on magic in Westeros. To see the same trick he used to increase magic's presence in the world being duplicated by YGG did not sit well with him. So, he took out a glass vial and began enchanting it to contain the magic of the saplings. After that, he stuffed all the saplings into the vial, which was also enchanted with space expansion charms. Harry decided to hold back on planting the saplings until he got a positive response from the old gods. The last thing he wanted was for the old gods to turn on him. Not that he was afraid of the little buggers. It was just that he was smart enough to pick his battles one at a time. Besides, the old gods have so far been a good sport. He was not going to bomb their current common ground on a misunderstanding. Therefore, Harry stayed put in Mormont Keep as the guest of House Mormont for the next few days, waiting for word from Avalon. It was a bright morning in the Mormont Keep, and Harry was looking over the mythical stories surrounding the Iron Islands within the library. Maester Alaric was by his side as he pored over some old tomes and scrolls containing some of the old tales surrounding the founding of House Mormont and their age-old feud with the Ironborn. The exact origins of House Mormont are lost to time, my lord, but almost all records point to the fact that King Roderick Stark claimed the Iron Islands from the Ironborn. The Bear Islands was given to a warrior by the name of Strider the Bear Hunter, who took up the name of Strider Mormont. Some masters in the Citadel believe Strider might be a bastard half-brother of King Roderick Stark. Maester Alaric explained, I want to know more about the origins of the Ironborn. More specifically, I want to know what sort of religion the Iron Islands and the Bear Island followed during the old times," said Harry, staring at the Maester of Mormont Keep. Maester Alaric rubbed his gray beard thoughtfully. "I'm afraid there are no tomes in this library that contains the origins of the Ironborn. Such rare tomes might be available in the Citadel. However, it's a popular theory in the Citadel that the Ironborn followed the old gods before they began worshipping the drowned god." "I see," Harry murmured. "What about the Bear Island? What religion did the people of Bear Island follow?" Despite the rule of Ironborn, very little evidence could be found whether the people of Bear Island worshipped the drowned god. There are some scrolls containing testaments of old that speak of rituals performed by the Lord of Bear Island. Some of those rituals have continued to this day. Otherwise, the people have always worshipped the old gods," Maester Alaric explained. Harry nodded at the Maester before going back to reading up the scrolls. Maester Alaric suggested to see whether any of the rituals were mentioned in detail. There were some obscure, crude rituals performed by the Winter Kings of old. Therefore, he was looking to see whether there were any similarities between the old ways that were followed in Bear Island and mainland North. He had no interest in learning the culture or history of Bear Island. His interest lay purely in corroborating the origin story YGG told him. According to YGG, the spirit was native to the Iron Islands. At some point, the green-skinned spirit was expelled by the arrival of the drowned god. Harry found it more interesting that YGG was bonded to the weirwood trees the old gods inhabited. Apparently, the old gods had some sort of pact going on to share their abode with some spirits like YGG after the children sank the Arm of Dorn to stop the migration of first men. And this pact kept the old gods and YGG out of any conflict. YGG was supposed to be the guardian of the seas by commanding the Iron Islands while the old gods reigned supreme over the mainland. No matter how many tomes and scrolls Harry pored over in the library, he could not find any mention of other religions in Westeros. The closest he found that resembled YGG was from a passing mention of the Green Men of the Isle of Faces and Garth Greenhand. The Green Men were the mythical guardians of the Isle of Faces, where the children and the first men came to a pact that stopped their war. Garth Greenhand, on the other hand, was revered as a god at some time and had a similar look to YGG. I suppose I could learn more if the old gods were in a sharing mood, Harry thought. Not that he hadn't tried. He had tried to talk to the old gods through the godswood of Mormont Keep. His attempts were met with silence from the old gods. Either they were giving him a cold shoulder, or they couldn't hear him. He had even used legilimency on Mage Mormont to see whether the lady of House Mormont held some secrets in her mind. He came up with nothing. Disappointed with the lack of any findings, Harry turned to the next best thing. He decided to construct a weapon that could kill a god. From the folded space of his magical pouch, Harry took out the rune-powered forge and set it up in his room under heavy wards. He poured down ingots of enriched steel into the forge along with sawdust of weirwood. The rune-fueled forge lit up with white fire as Harry charged the runes. While the metal quickly began to fuse together, Harry shifted his focus to transfer the magical power trapped in the golden arrow YGG gifted him. Using the Elder Wand, Harry began binding the magical energy trapped in the arrow into the layers of metal. As his spellforging techniques took effect, the metal layers began entrapping the energy from the arrow under Harry's enchantments. After draining the last embers of magic from the golden arrow, Harry began using the folding techniques on the hot metal. When the work was done, he poured the molten metal into a mold, allowing it to cool off and assume the form of the shape in the mold. The cooling charms he applied aided in setting the molten metal layers until the weapon was finally ready. Applying the levitation charm, Harry pulled the sword out of the mold and inserted it into a handle made of weirwood wrapped in blue cloth. Harry stopped the forge and let it cool off while observing the sword floating by his side. He reached out and took the sword by the handle, and he flared his magic in a small quantity. The room lit up with a radiant white glow as the sword became inflamed with an aura of dense magical power. He could feel the rampant magical power's intent was infused with only one purpose: to kill a god. No other name would suit better than God Killer. I proclaim thee, God Killer, the weapon that makes the gods fade, Harry whispered, his eyes glowing bright white. A knock on the door of his room made him take his eyes off God Killer. With a flick of his wand, Harry wrapped up the forge in the subspace of his pouch and hid away the sword in the same place. He applied a cleaning charm on the room for good measure. "Come in," Harry said, making himself presentable while staring at the door. "My lord." Harry found the bright green eyes of Daisy Mormont on the other side of the door. He was not surprised to see Daisy Mormont look utterly normal despite the ordeal she went through. He had collected blood samples from the alleged daughter of YGG and Mage Mormont to see whether YGG spoke the truth. Once in Avalon, he could study the blood samples closely to ascertain the truth. Not to mention, he was curious to study the progeny of the so-called gods. After all, he had to kill a powerful one beyond the wall, and maybe a few more. "Yes, a raven came from Avalon," said Daisy Mormont. "Good." Harry was relieved. It was finally time to invade the Iron Islands and kill a god. It'd be an excellent opportunity to test out the effectiveness of God Killer. If it failed, he could always go for the killing curse. Not even the so-called gods were immune from death. The stag, the wolf, and the snake P1. Oberyn couldn't help but scoff as he watched the Reachmen break off their assault on the walls to focus on the sortie sent out by the Lannister garrison protecting the city of Lannisport. It was a shame, really. The Reachmen had the advantage in numbers, and they were not notably lacking in bravery. Yet, they were repeatedly failing to take the walls of the city. He supposed the will of the defenders outweighed the Reachmen in holding the defenses of the city walls. The defenders always had an advantage in a siege, but the campaign was nearly reaching a month with no tangible results to show for it. Well, the Reachmen didn't have much luck, but the same could not be said about the Dornish. Oberyn thought, his eyes gleaming with a wicked glint as he stared at the half-finished tunnel. "It'll take only 5 more days, my prince. After that, the tunnel will be finished." The rain was a blessing in disguise. The soil has loosened up, making it easier for the men to dig. Of course, there is the trouble with removing the water in the tunnel, but that's not much of a hindrance to our efforts, Ser Ryan Illyrian said, grinning at Oberyn. "Good. Are you confident you can complete the tunnel in 5 days?" Oberyn asked. "I'm confident, my prince." "Good work, Ser Ryan." "I'll not keep you from your work, Ser," said Oberyn, taking his leave from the mining site. Oberyn found Lord Harmon Euler and Ser Ulwick Euler outside his tent, waiting for him with Lord Franklin Fowler and Quentin Corgyle. "It's time, my lords. We must inform the Reachmen. We are 5 days at most away from completing the tunnels," Oberyn said. Instead of greeting this news with open arms, Oberyn noticed the lords were looking uneasily at each other. "What?" Oberyn asked, looking curiously at his fellow Dornishmen. "The Reachmen are getting tired of the siege. They think they should stop the attacks and wait for King Robert to attack from the east," said Lord Franklin Fowler. "Cowardly fools," Oberyn hissed. "If we stop the siege, the Lannisters will increase their sorties and attempt to breach our camps. The chances of our tunnel getting found out are too risky." Oberyn began cursing the Reachmen under his breath as he paced inside his tent, looking furious. He was not going to let that brutish Stormlander stag beat him to the city because the Reachmen were a bunch of cowards. "Call Lord Redwyne and Hightower to a meeting. I won't have them stand in our way of taking the city," Oberyn finally said. Nearly half an hour later, Oberyn watched the Reach lords enter his tent with long faces. To his surprise, Lords Paxtor Redwyne and Baelor Hightower were not alone. There was Lord Alfin Costane and Lord John Bulwer. "My lords, please, take a seat." Oberyn welcomed his guests, giving them plush cushions and chairs to sit on while he signaled for the servants to bring more wine. "Prince Oberyn, why have you called us?" Paxtor Redwyne asked, making a face at the Dornish red offered in a silver chalice for the Lord of the Arbor. "I've heard a tell that you're stopping the siege until King Robert starts the assault on the East Gate," Oberyn commented. "If you're here to convince us to make another attempt on the city walls, don't bother. Your troops remain intact while ours have suffered great casualties. We'll not be launching another assault on the walls until His Grace puts the eastern walls of the city under siege," said Paxtor Redwyne, his beady black eyes trained on Oberyn with a glare. "Our men are 5 days away from completing the tunnel. If you stop the assault and wait for His Grace to put the city on siege from the other side, the Lannisters will have enough time to learn our plans." Lord Fowler said tentatively. "Once the Lions learn of our tunnel, they'll take countermeasures against us. We might end up unable to bring down their walls for months." said Oberyn, staring critically at the Reachmen sitting in his tent. Is that what you want, my lords? We can finish the siege and take the city if you continue the assault for just 5 more days. Or else, we can all stay outside the walls of this city for another month and maybe more, said Lord Euler. Our answer is still no. Enough of our men have died, Prince Oberyn. If you are so interested in maintaining the siege, you're welcome to attack the walls with your men, said Lord Costane before taking to his feet. Other Reach Lords followed suit, except for Baelor Hightower. I apologize, Prince Oberyn. Our men are tired of death and blood. They need rest, said Baelor Hightower. Then those men should have stayed in the Reach instead of waging war against House Lannister. Oberyn growled coldly. What'll we do, my prince? Lord Euler asked once the Reachmen left the tent. Oberyn glared at the entrance of the tent through which the Reachmen walked away. You said something about the North getting attacked by the Ironborn, didn't you? Have you learned anything else? Oberyn asked, glancing at Lord Euler while draining a chalice full of strong wine, one of the sweetest of Dornish reds. Word has traveled to Fair Isle that the North is gathering all their ships to attack the Iron Islands. So, they beat back the Iron Fleet, Oberyn said, looking impressed as he knew the Ironborn were no novices when it came to naval warfare. Harry Stark is said to be gathering the fleets and raising another army to invade the Iron Islands. Some say the Black Wolf became scared of the Ironborn and refused to even step out of his castle. Other rumors suggest Harry Stark bewitched the Ironborn with his magic to wreak havoc in their home islands. So, all we have is a bunch of nonsense to rely on. Oberyn deadpanned. Unfortunately, yes. Lord Euler shrugged helplessly. Oberyn looked thoughtful for a moment before coming to a decision. Bring forth the maester. I have a raven to send to Avalon, Oberyn ordered. Stannis stared at the castle in the distance from behind a boulder. He could see small lights being lit around the castle walls as the skies darkened. Twilight was shining down on the castle of Silverhill, and Stannis couldn't help but worry about what was about to unfold. The next few hours would determine whether there was a need for a siege to take the seat of House Serret. He'd prefer there was no siege, as the terrain was against his army. The only option in the siege would be to starve out Silverhill, but it'd require too many days. Using siege towers was impractical as the terrain was too rocky to pull siege towers and catapults near the walls. Having accepted the inherent difficulties in breaching the castle walls using the usual methods of siege warfare, Stannis opted to send some of his trusted men inside the castle under disguise. At the same time, his army hid from the scouts of House Serret. Only a portion of the cavalry was allowed to stay with him and waited for the signal from the
Saboteur et sang forte.
The skies got darker while Stannis and his men kept a close eye on the walls for the signal. Maybe the men have failed and got captured. It has been 2 days, my prince, Lord Gullion Swan suggested, looking worriedly at the closing gates of the castle. I trust Ser Axel to capture the gate for us. He'll keep his word, Stannis said with conviction. I hope so, my prince. The Reachmen, after all, are not known for their prowess in battle, Lord Gullion commented, earning snickers from the Stormlanders in his company. Stannis got the urge to grit his teeth, but he held off on his usual reaction despite the nagging from the cowardly Lord of House Swan. After all, Lord Swan was given the chance to lead the party inside the castle. Not only did the Lord of Stonehelm refuse the offer, but the man also did not allow his sons to join Ser Axel. If you were so worried about the success of Ser Axel, you should have led the men inside Silverhill. Stannis snapped back, shutting off all the snickering idiots. Stannis was truly worried about the state of the Stormlands. He could see the lords of the Stormlands were getting more and more bold because of his elder brother's disinterest in ruling and Renly's lackluster attitude when it came to governing. He resolved to reign in the Stormlords after the war. There was some urgent need to bring some order over the Stormlords, lest they become too unbearable to manage in the future. It was one of the reasons why the Storm Kings faced a shrinking kingdom after every generation. The Gardener Kings had always taken great advantage of the internal strife and lack of unity among the Stormlords. Stannis feared the same could happen if the Stormlords were left under the rule of Renly. There are so many mistakes that should be addressed once I ascend the throne, Stannis thought grimly. My prince, look. There is the signal. Stannis immediately looked to the top of the walls, and sure enough, He could see the light appearing and disappearing in a recurring pattern.
Ser balón.
Give the signal. Stannis ordered. The second son of Lord Gullion Swan lit a lamp and placed it above the boulder for a moment. Ser Balon quickly removed it, and the lamp atop the wall of the castle stopped flickering. It's Ser Axel's men. Stannis confirmed. It's time. We ride to the gate at full speed. Alert the men. Stannis ordered. He gave the overall command of the army to Lord Mathis Rowan, who had joined his host from the North March. Ride with me, Ser Balon Swan. Stannis ordered, eyeing the bulwark form of the night. Stannis rode out with many brave knights from the Stormlands and the Reach surrounding him on their horses. They urged their horses to pick up speed as time was of the essence. Luck was the only thing now keeping their hopes up for a quick victory. The gates of the castle remained open thanks to the efforts of Ser Axel's men. As Stannis reached closer to the gate, he could see fighting going on the walls of the castle. He urged his horse to go faster as every moment was precious. Enemies ahead, Ser Balon Swan cried, pointing ahead towards the gates of the castle. Sure enough, Stannis could see some men rushing to defend the gates of the castle. Crossbowmen, forward. Use the crossbows on my command. Stannis shouted. Stannis gave the command as they neared the gates, and the crossbowmen let loose the bolts. One by one, the men of House Serret fell as the bolts pierced their bodies. Stannis unsheathed his sword and made himself ready for the battle. Attack! He screamed, raising his sword high in the air as he rode through the gates. His horse smashed away an unknown soldier while he cut open the throat of a soldier holding a spear. Stannis swung his sword to his left, parrying a spear aiming for his side. He was quickly forced to bring his sword back to stab a soldier from behind his neck. He swung his sword many times, cutting and parrying as he battled inside the walls of the castle. Do not allow them to take back the gate. Hold the gate at all costs, Stannis shouted, making his horse turn at the last moment, escaping a spear thrust. Stannis stabbed his sword down and engaged in a small bout with the swordsman. He eventually won by stabbing his adversary in the eye. All around him, men were battling and dying. Fight! Fight to the last! Stannis screamed, hacking and stabbing at anyone unfortunate enough to cross blades with him. His sword was drenched in blood, as were the greaves and gauntlets he was wearing. He didn't know how long he kept cutting down enemy soldiers, but Stannis fought till he could no longer exert himself. His sword arm felt like it could no longer move an inch. Thankfully, by that time, Lord Rowan arrived with the rest of the army, and House Serret could no longer withstand the assault. Stannis only stopped cutting down men when he saw most men bearing the banners of House Serret were throwing down their weapons on the ground. The ground was littered with bodies, limbs, and blood. Stannis grimaced as the heat of the battle slowly left him, and the stench of death invaded his nostrils. He could feel his limbs slowly losing their strength, but somehow, he held on to his sword. The blood on his armor and shield made his skin crawl, but he clamped his mouth shut and urged his horse forward. My prince, Lord Mathis Rowan called, coming closer atop his horse. We have the main keep surrounded. Perhaps we should offer terms to Lord Serret. Good. Let's ensure Lord Gideon Serret understands the folly of aligning with the lions. Stannis smirked, aligning his horse towards the keep where Lord Serret and his family were huddled in. The surrender of Lord Serret was a sordid affair. Lord Gideon had lost 3 cousins and a son during the course of the battle. The lords of Northmarch were particularly unapologetic for Lord Serret's loss, as the man had flooded their lands by breaking the dam built across the Lesser Mander during the invasion. The lords of the Northmarch had even petitioned him to have Lord Serret executed, but he denied such a harsh punishment. Instead, he decided to capture Silverhill's treasury and had it split evenly among the lords of the Northmarch. He also forced Lord Serret to sign away a portion of gains from the silver mines the man owns for the crown. The lords of Stormlands were left in the lurch with nothing except for the glory of victory. The cautious and more respectful conduct he received from the Stormlords post the victory celebrations in Silverhill let Stannis know that the lords received his message loud and clear. Stannis found it ironic that he was far more popular among the Reachmen than his fellow Stormlanders. With Silverhill falling to his army, the path to Deep Den was now open. He had already sent scouts ahead to chart a good path for the army to take Deep Den from the west. The faster Deep Den fell, the faster he could join the siege of Lannisport and Casterly Rock. I wonder how others are faring in this war. Stannis wondered. Your Grace. Robert looked at the idiot who distracted him from enjoying the sweet taste of Arbor Gold. What? He snapped. Your Grace, Lord Tyrell and Lord Dondarrion are here to see you. They say it is important. Robert frowned at the young mousy-looking boy. He could not even remember retaining a boy like this in his services. All right, let them in. Call Ser Barristan as well, Robert said, his words slurring towards the end. Robert stayed put in his seat, pouring himself another jug of wine. While enjoying the wine, Robert heard the footsteps closing in. He rubbed his eyes as light filtered into his tent as Mace Tyrell, Beric Dondarrion, and Ser Barristan walked inside. Comer, all of you. Is it time for the siege to begin? Robert asked, adjusting himself in his chair. I'm afraid not, Your Grace. Siege engines and towers are being built as we speak. It'll take us a day more to complete the works, and then we can start the siege. Lord Dondarrion spoke. Robert frowned at being forced to camp outside the walls of Craighall while the Dornish were attacking Lannisport and Eddard was fighting the lions in the field. He felt like he was being kept safely tucked away, and that made him mad. What is it then? Robert growled. We have received word from Prince Stannis. He says Silver Hill has fallen, and House Serret surrendered. The prince rode out and took the castle by surprise, said Beric Dondarrion. Huh. Finally, some good news. Robert smacked the table before him, making everyone flinch at the sound. What news do you have about the siege of Lannisport? I'm afraid there is nothing interesting to report, Your Grace. You know, the Dornish. They remain outside the walls, whining and dining, while good reachmen fight to take the city's walls. Mace Tyrell complained. Robert got the urge to dismiss the simpering Tyrell, but he could not be bothered to do so. Instead, he just shrugged and turned his eyes on Lord Dondarrion. Has there been any word from Eddard? The Northerners have waged a bloody campaign all over the coasts. The Northerners, led by Lord Eddard, sacked Ashmark. House Ryswell took the mines of Castamere. The Crag and Banefort surrendered without a fight, seeing the folly of supporting Tywin Lannister. Robert laughed aloud, his whole body shaking with glee. I should have joined Ned instead of slugging through this wasteland. Tell me more. Is Ned going to march on the rock? Robert asked eagerly, looking at Beric Dondarrion. Not yet, Your Grace. Sarsfield stands between them and the rock. Ser Brynden has been sending out riding parties, testing the castle's defenses. Once Sarsfield falls, the path to Casterly Rock will open before our allies in the north and the Riverlands, said Beric. Robert grunted non-committally. He supposed there was still time for him to meet Eddard and fight side by side like in the old days. Harry read the small parchment Maester Marwyn had given him at Avalon. It was a short message from Oberyn Martell, requesting his aid to bring down the walls of Lannisport. Under normal circumstances, he'd have set aside such a request even if Oberyn's offer of reduced port fees for his ships was an enticing offer. It was not as if he had some immediate plans for using the ports of Dorne. But the offer was quite interesting, and he had plans to expand his trade fleet, not to mention his plans for greater expeditions to distant lands of Essos and Summer Isles required Dorne's assistance. It was not just the prospect of expanding his trade fleets that made Harry consider the request. The siege of Lannisport was undoubtedly going to be the center of attention in this war. This provided him with an opportunity to show his power to all of Westeros and his new enemies in the Free Cities. The Ironborn had generously provided him with a convenient avenue for displaying his power and scaring away any of his potential enemies. But having a small display of power at Lannisport might also get him a good amount of prestige. It also helped Prince Oberyn was offering him the harbor of Fair Isle and a few ships from the Dornish fleet for the invasion of the Iron Isles. I suppose having my display of power openly done before the lords of mainland Westeros would give me more exposure, Harry muttered with a thoughtful frown. Ser Silos, my lord, have word sent to the rest of our ships to sail as planned towards Blacktide. We'll be going to Lannisport before joining them on the attack. Dorne has pledged her support for our invasion, and I have some business to conduct with Prince Oberyn. My lord, we are flying. How do we send word? Silos Poole asked, looking lost. Tell Anya. She'll take the flying carpet and inform the captains. said Harry. Harry waved dismissively as Silos bowed and went about issuing orders. Meanwhile, Harry moved closer to the glass window of his airship and stared ahead. A fleet of 30 ships was arrayed below on the ocean, all with full sails, intent on teaching a lesson the Ironborn could never forget. And 4 artworks related to the story. Discord, https://discord. GG/NW2JH25FJF. The stage, Wolf and Snake P2. Bernard stared at the brick walls and the watchtower morosely. It had been weeks since he had seen his wife and daughter. Ever since the war began, he was forced to serve in the Lannister army. But, unlike his friends, he was charged to stand guard atop the walls of Lannisport. He was pretty thankful as he considered it a safe post. After all, many of his friends had ridden out with the Lannister army under Ser Kevin to attack the Reach. He didn't know what happened to them. There were rumors that Ser Kevin and the entire Lannister army he led were defeated. Some rumors claimed Ser Kevin transformed into a giant lion and roared, shaking the foundation stones of Highgarden itself. Some other rumors claimed Ser Kevin attacked King's Landing and was now ruling as the king. Some small folks say Ser Kevin was struck down by Stannis Baratheon, who was riding a flying horse. Even more fanciful claims say a great storm swept the Lannister armies away. Bernard didn't know what to believe, and frankly, he didn't care. He just wanted the war to end and be with his wife and daughter. It was a sentiment shared by almost everyone. No one wanted to fight this war. But the chances of getting out of the war alive were getting slim as days passed by. The Dornish and Reach armies were camped outside the walls of Lannisport. The only thing that kept him alive so far was luck and the recent inactivity from the enemy side. The Reachmen had, for some reason, stopped trying to breach the city walls. His colleagues in the garrison said the Reachmen and the accursed Dornishmen were going to abandon the siege and sail back home. Bernard hoped it was true. He prayed to the 7-day and night for the enemy to take their ships and sail away from the city. He was dearly missing his pig farm, his wife's cooking, his daughter's smile, and even his daughter's pet cat. All able-bodied men were conscripted to serve in the Lannister army to defend the city from falling into enemy hands. He could not escape the service even if he wanted to. It was not as if he could hide away in his barn. Thankfully, he was given the duty of a lookout most of the time since the Reachmen had stopped their attacks. It made his days rather dull, but at least he was alive. It was also a relief to see the Reachmen and Dornishmen stop bombarding the city with fiery stones. But they remained camped on the harbor despite many sorties led against their camps by some of the bravest knights of Lannisport. He had the feeling that the enemy camped outside the walls of the city was merely waiting for the right time to strike rather than losing their appetite for war. If that was the case, Bernard feared his days were numbered, and his luck was running short. Letting out a long breath, Bernard carved one more line on the wall with a piece of sharpened stone, marking the total number of days since he took up his post on the wall. After doing so, he climbed up the stairs inside the tower to the turret. After climbing to the top, Bernard opened the hatch that led to the turret and hauled himself over. The sun slowly rose in the east, a placid red ball among the clouds. Looking to the west, where the enemy was supposed to camp, Bernard found a lot of fog. But he froze upon seeing a strange sight. At first, Bernard thought he was imagining things. He rubbed his eyes and looked again. Unfortunately, he saw the same sight, keying into the fact that he was not going mad. Bernard opened his mouth to scream or make any sound that would attract the garrison's attention, but no sound came from his throat. He felt his palms sweat as he stared with wide eyes at 3 large floating contraptions that looked like a ship staying afloat among the clouds. "Wah? Who?" Bernard stuttered, the disbelief pervading his mind, turning into fear with every waking moment. Everyone! Wake up! Ring the bells!" Bernard screamed at the top of his lungs, staring with wide eyes at the behemoths floating in the sky. Bernard rushed down the stairs, climbing down from the turret, and blew the horn as loud as possible. It didn't take long for the other lookouts in the towers along the wall to take notice of the floating ships. Bells began ringing in the city as the flying ships set a frenzy among the garrison. "What in the name of the 7 are those things?" Bernard muttered, staring at the flying contraptions with dread, fearing for his life and that of his family. The garrison manning the walls were not the only ones scared witless seeing the flying ships. That became abundantly clear when Harry saw the terrified faces of men among the Dornish and the Reach camp. They look like they're about to shit themselves, Harry thought amusedly, staring down at the men on the ground as he floated down slowly on a flying carpet with 2 bodyguards standing by his side. He supposed he understood why the spirits get carried away by the god complex after interacting with human tribes. Even Harry was feeling an unhealthy amount of superiority as he stared down at the soldiers on the ground. It was also possible that a significant number of men among the Dornish and the Reach army were already seeing him as a godlike figure. Even if he was not afforded a godly status, a demigod or demonic status was most likely within the realm of possibility, depending on the people's perspective. And Harry was adamant about creating a perspective in people's minds about him that'd make them think twice before making an enemy out of him. Prince Oberyn, I heard you were in need of assistance, said Harry once the carpet hovered a few inches away from the ground. You see, a measly wall stands in our way, said Oberyn, taking his eyes off the flying ships to grin at Harry. You've been busy. Everyone needs a hobby. Harry grinned, shrugging his shoulders as he stepped away from the hovering carpet. His guards followed suit, and the carpet folded upon itself and was safely tucked away into a bag by one of his bodyguards. You have strange hobbies, student of mine. Come, we have much to discuss, you and I. Oberyn invited Harry into his tent. Lead the way, said Harry. The ships remained hovering in the sky, making the Dornishmen and Reachmen eye them warily for the rest of the day. It was not as if there was anything better to do for most of them, as they had stopped attacking the city walls. Meanwhile, Harry stared amusedly at Oberyn, who was pacing irritably inside the tent. His bodyguards were standing guard outside Oberyn's tent. So, why exactly did you seek me out? From the looks of the army gathered here, it's not an impossible task to breach the walls of the city. Harry asked curiously. Trust me, you'll be thinking even breathing is impossible if you spend enough time with the Reachmen, said Oberyn, pouring himself a chalice full of wine before offering it to Harry. Fair enough, said Harry, accepting the wine, but he refrained from consuming the red fluid. So, you need my help to bring down the walls of the city. I can do that, but for a price. My offer for aid in your invasion against the Ironborn not enough? Oberyn asked with a raised eyebrow. Oh, that's an attractive prospect, but I'm more interested in Dorne's ports and shipping lanes into Essos and the Summer Isles, said Harry, ignoring whatever troubles the Dornish were facing with the Reachmen. It was not as if Harry cared one whit what went on between the two of the southernmost kingdoms enough for Prince Oberyn to seek his aid. But he cared deeply about expanding his trade fleet and naval presence of the north in the Sunset Sea and the Summer Sea. If he was to maintain his influence over the Iron Islands after this war, he wanted guaranteed port rights to expand trade. What exactly do you have in mind? Oberyn asked. Harry furnished a leaf of parchment from his pocket, passing it to Oberyn's hands. This, Oberyn's eyes widened as he read the contents of the parchment, will require my brother's consent. I know. The terms are negotiable, but I'd like to see this agreement signed, said Harry. Dornish support for gaining control over Blacktide, Harlaw, and Fair Isle. Isn't that a bit too much to ask? You are, despite your incredible great feats, a child. I doubt King Robert would agree to give you control over 3 islands in the Sunset Sea, and Fair Isle remains under the control of the Dornish army, Oberyn said, staring at Harry with a pointed look. You let me worry about King Robert. The islands are non-negotiable. Even the Fair Isle? Oberyn asked incredulously. Yes, Harry said with a straight face. Harry was not going to say that he merely wanted control over the 2 islands of the Iron Islands. Gaining Fair Isle would be difficult, but he could let the demand drop to gain some lucrative port rights. He had no doubt that an intelligent man like Oberyn Martell would understand what he was after. Besides, it was not like he had the manpower to keep his hold over Fair Isle. Even if he managed to wrestle control of Blacktide and Harlaw as he imagines, he could only keep up the hold over the islands with judicious use of Confoundus Charm and Imperious Curse. Adding Fair Island to the mix would undoubtedly bring unnecessary strain into his everyday life. As it was, his plans surrounding Blacktide and Harlaw were focused on extracting the manpower resources from these islands to increase settlements in Sea Dragon Point and expanding his naval workforce. The access of ports and securing safe sea lanes around these two islands were his secondary objectives. As such, Harry was not hoping to hold on to these islands for more than 5 years. If he could pull it off without magic, then he'd be delighted. But he would not be surprised if the Ironborn managed to resist his attempts to change their culture in their home islands. After all, Harry was going into this new social engineering of the Ironborn with an open mind. Failure is very much under consideration in what was going to be a long, exigent path that lay ahead. Harry thought with a frown. If he failed to purge the Ironborn culture from Blacktide and Harlaw, then there was only one way ahead.
Totale destruction.
Harry thought grimly. The Ironborn will never again wage war on the people of this world. So, do we have a deal, Prince Oberyn? Harry asked, offering his hand, which the Prince of Dorne took after a brief moment of hesitation. These terms are acceptable. They shook hands, and a pact was made on the fallen harbor of Lannisport. A few hours later, Harry stood before the Dornish army, facing the giant stone wall protecting Lannisport. I was meaning to ask this earlier. Where did you find these two? Oberyn asked, looking curiously at the two foreign-looking guards flanking Harry. Why are you interested in them? Harry asked, raising his eyebrow ever so slightly. Because they're Associ. I don't remember seeing Associ guards in your service when I visited Avalon or Winterfell, said Oberyn. Darrow and Crayet recently came into my service. They hail from the city of Karth. I see. There must be an interesting tale behind how a Stark of Winterfell got entangled with the warlocks of the East. Oberyn whispered. Harry shrugged and merely raised the Elder Wand, pointing it straight at the wall. He was not bothered by Oberyn's keen deduction skills. It was to be expected. After all, Prince Oberyn was a well-traveled man. Brace yourselves, Harry warned the Dornishmen as he pooled his power for what was about to happen. Breaching the city walls was instead a leisurely affair in Harry's mind. All the grandstanding was not necessary. He could just wave his hand and transfigure all the stones in the wall into harmless pebbles. He could have shrunk the wall, or even made it disappear altogether. But none of those spells would be flashy. The reason Harry came here was to show off his power. In his mind, there was nothing more powerful and flamboyant than the power of the sky. Fulmin, a bright blue light shone out of the tip of Harry's wand. A long, powerful arc of lightning blasted out of the tip of his wand with a deafening roar. The ground shook, the skies trembled, the tides gnawed at the land. And then all was quiet as if nature was taking stock of what happened. Harry brought back his wand arm to his side, pointing the death stick downward. He studied the sizable gaping hole he had created on the wall of Lannisport. The stones were blown out into the city because of the spell. He could already hear the screams coming from the city as its people no doubt realized they were no longer protected from the army camped outside. Prince Oberyn, your enemies await you. I hope House Martell shows restraint where needed, said Harry, turning away from the sight of the destroyed wall to stare at the wide black eyes of Oberyn Martell. When Prince Oberyn wordlessly nodded, Harry knew it was time for him to leave. I'll leave you to it then.
Come Daro Craiat.
My work here is done, said Harry, climbing abroad his flying carpet before the watchful eyes of the three armies fighting a bloody war over Lannisport. As the carpet took to the skies taking Harry and his guards, he could see all eyes following him. Arrows and bolts were let loose from the battlements of the wall, but they never reached Harry. All of them fell short as he was out of their range, and even if they could reach him, he had a magical shield around him just in case. This world now knows magic's might, Harry whispered. But only the winds heard him. Unlike previous days, Robert was sober today. He had not touched an ounce of wine, but then again, he never had to. There was no greater feeling other than getting his blood pumping in his veins as he fought a bloody battle in the field. He'd not have that feeling suppressed by drinking wine. Robert let out a cackle as he smashed Godsgrief on the helmet of a Crakehall soldier. The man fell with his head smashed in and his neck twisted at an odd angle. Someone tried to smack him with a shield, but Robert smacked it away with Godsgrief and stabbed the sharp tip of his hammer into the neck of the enemy. Robert wrenched his hammer back and watched as a young boy, not older than 10 and 7, fell to his knees, struggling to stem the lifeblood flowing from his neck. Taking pity on the boy, Robert smashed his hammer on the boy's head with great force. The boy lay prone on the ground, drenched in his own blood, never to rise again. Robert didn't have time to spare more thought on the boy and moved on to his next opponent. Ironically, his next opponent was an old man with a long white beard and gray eyes. The old man swung his sword straight for his head. Robert expertly ducked and swept the man off his feet with his hammer. The old man fell on his back with a loud groan. Robert made sure the old man never made another sound when he crushed the man's face with God's grief. The blood that spilt out from the broken skull of the old man entered his right eye, leaving Robert temporarily blind. Therefore, he was late to react when someone tried to tackle him. Falling on the floor, Robert punched the man with his left arm. While the punch connected to the jaw, leaving the man reeling from the blow, Robert did not come unscathed. He could feel a sharp, stinging pain on his waist. His right hand immediately sought out the source of pain and found a dagger punching through a weak spot in his armor. Yelling out in pain, Robert wrenched the dagger out to see fresh blood spill out from the wound. Seeing his blood, Robert was just about ready to smash the enemy's face into a bloody pulp. But he didn't get the chance as Ser Barristan cleaved through his assailant's neck, leaving the head to tumble down into the ground from the man's shoulders. "Your Grace, are you all right?" Ser Barristan asked, helping Robert to his feet. "My ego is bruised, Ser." Robert laughed, hiding the wound as he knew the Lord Commander would escort him out of the battle if the knight saw the wound. "We're almost there, Your Grace. The ram will break the door and break the gates," Ser Barristan said, batting away a spear and cutting open the throat of the poor sod who tried to battle Barristan the Bold. "Well, it's taking them too long. Let's give them a hand. Follow me," Robert shouted as he smacked away a Crakehall soldier by smashing in the ribs with his hammer. "To me! To me!" cried Robert as he paved his way through the enemy soldiers with Ser Barristan by his side. Halfway through, he was joined by Ser Mandon Moore and Ser Ares Oakhart in cutting a bloody swathe through the enemy. When they finally reached the gate, Robert could see the men handling the ram were struggling to break the gates of Crakehall. Arrows were claiming the lives of men handling the ram, and to make matters worse, Robert even saw pots of hot water being dropped on his men. Stones were being dropped on the men, who were unfortunate enough to try to take refuge from the arrows by staying too close to the walls. "We'll have to break the gate before they take another sortie," Robert muttered, looking at his hammer and then at the gates. He supposed it was time to see whether Harry Stark's claim that God's grief could shatter the bones of a dragon was true or not. "Shields!" Robert roared as he went straight for the metal-plated gate. The men around him, including his Kingsguard knights, protected him with their shields. With all his strength, Robert swung his hammer and struck a mighty blow on the gate with God's grief. The gate shook and groaned while the metal plate dented inwards. "It's breaking! The gates are breaking!" the men shouted happily. Robert paid it no heed as he struck the gate again with might force, and this time a portion of the gate broke off its hinge. He delivered 2 more blows, and the entire gate broke away from its hinges and fell over to the other side, crushing enemy soldiers underneath. "To victory!" Robert screamed, raising his hammer in the air. "Robert! Robert! Robert!" the men chanted, and Robert knew he had missed this so dearly. He forgot all about the pain on his side as he happily engaged in battle with the castle garrison, with men roaring his name to the heavens. He had never felt more alive than on the battlefield, and Tywin Lannister was making it enjoyable for him every step of the way. "If this keeps up, I might have to reward the old lion for entertaining me," Robert thought, smashing his hammer into the chest of an unlucky fellow as he gained a foothold in the castle. When the battle finally ended, Robert was drenched in blood from head to toe. The problem was that he had no idea whether it was his blood or the blood of his enemies. He liked to think it was just the blood of his enemies, but when the rush of battle left him, his body keenly felt the strain and the pain. God's grief slipped from his hand. He could hear the sound of the magical weapon clattering on the ground. At that moment, the last iota of strength in his body left him. Robert fell by the steps of the main keep under the watchful eyes of his Kingsguard knights. "Your Grace!" Robert could see Ser Barristan and Ser Ares rush to his side and help him lie down on the floor away from the steps. "Call the maester." "Now!" Ser Barristan roared at the men. "We won a great victory today. A feast must be arranged," Robert muttered, his eyes spinning without focus. "Your Grace! Help is coming, Your Grace!" Ser Barristan said in alarm. I'm quite fine. His words slurred towards the end as dark spots entered his vision. Robert felt the world spin, and darkness claimed him. All-seeing eye, Randall Tarley felt like the gods were playing a cruel joke on him. He was quite eagerly waiting for the chance to take the fight to the Lannisters and even breach the walls of Lannisport while fighting side by side with Robert Baratheon. He had hoped to etch his name in the annals of history by fighting in the battle that'd decide the fate of Lannisport. But all his hopes and dreams were wasted away as word came from the largest city of the Westerlands. Of all the things he was expecting to hear, he did not think he'd be hearing about the success of the Dornish army. Somehow, the accursed Dornishmen had managed to breach the walls of one of the largest and most well-defended cities in Westeros. It was not the first time the Dornish army breached the walls of a city in Westeros, but it was the first time a Dornish force breached the walls of a city in the Westerlands. Randall was almost certain it was the first time any army managed to breach Lannisport since the city's inception. The tales coming from the city of Lannisport were disconcerting. Wild tales were circulating among the men gathered at Crake-Hall. Fanciful claims and tales of sorcery were being spread amongst men of the army. It was claimed the Dornish summoned the waters of Rhoyne and flooded the city. Some claim the storm god came down from the skies to punish the Lannisters for defying House Baratheon. The most popular, however, was the rumors of Harry Stark using his sorcery to bring down the walls of Lannisport. Supposedly, the Stark boy came upon the city on his flying ship and called down a great lightning strike on the city wall of Lannisport. The wall seemingly collapsed, and the Dornish army under Prince Oberyn sacked the city. Randall didn't know what to believe, but all rumors claimed Lannisport had fallen to the Dornish army. From the war's perspective, it was a great boon to see the fall of Lannisport. With the city's fall, more Westermen would abandon the Lannister cause. More lords of the Westerlands would see the folly of following Lord Tywin and would seek to surrender rather than fight for a losing cause. Already, the tightly wound lords of the Westerlands were unraveling after the fall of Lannisport. That was why Randall sought an audience with King Robert with Lord Gon Westerling and Ser Ellis Westerling by his side. You'll not speak until you are asked to. Am I clear? Randall stared at the two men, stopping them from turning the corner towards the corridor that led to the king's chambers in Crake-Hall. We understand, my lord. All I want is for my family to be safe. The Northerners have the crag under their control. My wife and daughters. Lord Gon looked at him with pleading eyes. As I said before, Lord Stark has taken your castle. The Northerners have treated your family as befitting their station. They're safe. Randall assured the brown-haired man, who was understandably worried for his family. Randall couldn't fault the man. The Northerners tend to have a dangerous reputation. Most of it was just rumors and old tales spread by the Septons and Septas because of the long years of conflict between the First Men and Undulls. If anything, the Northerners treated the Westermen far better than the Reachmen ever would have under the current circumstances. The recent battle to claim Crake-Hall stands as a prime example of what happens when men are ruled by their desire for revenge. The over-enthusiasm of the Reachmen to take their revenge on the Westermen ended up robbing Lord Roland Crake-Hall of two sons. The Lord of Crake-Hall had been near inconsolable ever since his two sons, Tybolt and Merlin Crake-Hall, were buried in the local September. Now, Crake-Hall's heir was Lord Roland's second son, Lyle Crake-Hall, otherwise known as the Strongboar. Unfortunately, Lyle Crake-Hall was in Lannisport, serving as the commander of the local garrison. Inquiries have been made about the Strongboar, but the Dornish have yet to respond. This state of affairs put them in an awkward position with House Crake-Hall. For the time being, Lord Roland and his household were kept prisoners inside the castle rather than welcomed into the king's peace. It was a necessary move, but a costly one as well. If the army had to move forward, they'd need to leave a considerable force to garrison the castle. After all, they could not leave Crake-Hall to be taken over by a hostile force. And knowing what he knew of the plans of Lord Tywin, their discretion in keeping Castle Crake-Hall under their control was all the more necessary. Randall led the Westerlings to the king's chamber guarded by Ser Aery Oakhart and Ser Barristan. For a moment, Randall wondered about the whereabouts of Ser Mandon Moore and Ser Preston Greenfield. But he was not worried, as it was to his advantage that Ser Greenfield was far away from King Robert. Ser Barristan, it's time, Randall said, nodding at the Lord Commander of the King's Guard. He had been holding on to certain revelations that came to light thanks to the Westerlings. After all, he had to investigate properly before taking up the matter with the king. Nonetheless, he had confided the details of his findings with Ser Barristan. "A moment, Lord Tarley," Ser Barristan said, going into the king's chamber alone. There was a notable chatter coming from the room while Randall waited patiently outside, with the Westerlings looking rather uncomfortable. He had to admit that Ser Ares Oakhart was looking somewhat intimidating today. While the Knight of Old Oak was relatively young, this war proved that the knight was a warrior of great skill. He supposed the Westerlings knew Ser Ares' vow of cutting down every weapon-bearing Westerman to avenge his brother's untimely death at the hands of the mountain. "I suppose it's good that the Westerlings are deprived of their weapons," Randall thought, eyeing the cold look in the Kingsguard knight's onyx eyes. The door opened, showing Ser Barristan.
Come?
"His Grace will hear you." Randall nodded. Taking a deep breath, he followed the Lord Commander inside with Lord Gawain Westerling and Ser Ellis Westerling closely following him. "Your Grace." Randall bowed, as did the Westerlings. His eyes only briefly lingered on the stitched wound just above the left hip of the king. The wound had yet to heal properly, but the maesters were confident that the king's life was not jeopardized. Yet, King Robert was asked to rest until the maesters said otherwise. Besides, it was not as if they were in a hurry to move out of Crakehall. There was no rush to move against Lannisport, thanks to the Dornish army breaching the walls of the city. "Ser Barristan tells me there is a grave matter you wish to discuss with me." "Say it, Lord Tarley," King Robert said, staring at him and his companions. "Your Grace, I've uncovered a plot by Tywin Lannister to capture you with the aid of Ser Preston Greenfield." "Ser Greenfield?" Robert asked in surprise, looking at Ser Barristan, who showed a grave face and no defenses for his fellow Kingsguard knight. "I'm afraid so, Your Grace. The fall of Lannisport has made Lord Gawain Westerling see he had erred in choosing to follow Lord Tywin, and came forward with the information about the plot being devised against you in return for leniency," said Randall. "Ser Barristan?" King Robert looked questioningly at the Lord Commander. "Lord Tarley had shared his concerns with me, Your Grace. I had been keeping watch over Ser Greenfield ever since. I'm afraid I have doubts regarding Ser Greenfield's loyalty, Your Grace," Ser Barristan informed the king, looking rather tired. "Tell me everything," Robert commanded, and Randall was only happy to oblige. Varys smiled at the serving girl that came to deliver his early morning delicacy. "I thank you, Alana. I hope it was not too much of a hassle," he said kindly to the red-haired serving girl, as she placed the cup on his table while he was going over the many reports he had received today. "Not at all, my lord. If there is anything you need, you only need to ask," Alana said, her face holding a perfect mask of innocence, but a mask nonetheless. He knew there were no innocent servants in the Red Keep, especially one employed by Peter Baelish. The girl's innocence had long since been gone or taken. Varys was about to dismiss the girl when his office doors opened, and Jon Arryn appeared at the doorway. "Lord Arryn." Varys raised an eyebrow at the presence of the hand in his quarters. "What a pleasant surprise. Please sit, my Lord Hand." "Alana, my dear, pour a cup for Lord Arryn, and close the door behind while you leave." "Of course, my lord." The serving girl filled the cup with the aromatic fluid before she took her leave, closing the door behind her as she left.